Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The red Martian dust swirled outside the window of a small cabin David Prescott now called home. Once he had stood in the center of Earth, the greatest halls of power, commanding the attention of millions as the president of the Earth Federation. Now he sat alone, isolated on a foreign world, forgotten by the people he had once sworn to lead. The walls of his self-imposed exile felt suffocating, and though Mars offered endless horizons of barren land, he couldn't escape the weight of his failure. He rubbed his temples and exhaled slowly, staring blankly at the faint light of the Martian dawn creeping through the window. Each day was a reminder of the election he had lost, one marred by political betrayal, smear campaigns, and false accusations. He had retreated to Mars, hoping to disappear. It had been a quiet escape, one that offered no closure, but at least the silence was bearable. Here, no one expected anything from him anymore, or so he thought. The soft chime of his communication console broke through his thought. David's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the screen. A message from Sophia Cole, one of the head scientists at the Mars Colony Medical Division. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Curiosity nudged him toward the console, and with a reluctant sigh, he pressed the button to accept the message. Sophia's face appeared on the screen, her sharp eyes reflecting urgency, her brow furrowed in concern. David, I need to talk to you. It's such important. He leaned back, folding his arms over his chest. I told you, Sophia. I am done with all of that. I am not here to fix anyone's problems anymore. Her expression hardened. This isn't about politics. This is about survival. David hesitated. Oh. We've got a problem on Mars, a big one there, said the virus spreading through the colony, something we've never seen before. It's killing people fast. We were calling it dust fever. It's nice, respiratory, airborne, and highly contagious. Our resources here are limited, and without outside help,
we're on the brink of collapse.
David's heart sank. He had expected some mundane crisis, a supply shortage, a malfunction in the colony system. But this, a deadly virus. He had seen enough plagues on Earth to know the damage one could do to a closed system, like the Mars colony. What do you want from me? I need your help, your connections. You have the knowledge, the access to resources, and more importantly, you know how to lead. We can do this without you. David shook his head. I am not that man anymore. Sophia, you know that. I don't care who you think you are. People are dying, David. And it's going to get a lot worse unless someone steps up. You may not be president anymore, but you are still the only one who can get us through this. The weight of her words hung in the air. He wanted to refuse, to turn away and stay hidden in the dust of Mars. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. The responsibilities of leadership were ingrained in his bones, no matter how far he had run from them. David ran a hand through his graying hair and let out a heavy sigh. Fine, I'll see what I can do. But don't expect a miracle. Sophia's face softened, the tension easing slightly from her shoulders. That's all I am asking for. The Mars colony was in worse shape than David had imagined as he stepped out into the central hub. He saw the signs of decay everywhere, panicked colonists huddled in small groups, fear etched into their faces, medical staff rushing between makeshift quarantine zones, and the unmistakable scent of disinfectant heavy in the air. Dust fever had already claimed dozens of lives, and the medical team was struggling to contain it. Sophia met him at the entrance to the medical facility, her face drawn and tired. She wore a mask, though it seemed more out of habit than any real protection. I am glad you came, she said, her voice muffled through the fabric. David nodded, his gaze drifting over the crowded corridors. Tell me what we were dealing with. Sophia led him inside, where the air was thick with the tension of the dying. We've confirmed over 100 cases in the past week. It spreads fast, attacks the lungs, and once symptoms show, it's usually fatal within 72 hours. Right, we've tried everything in our arsenal, antivirals, oxygen therapy, even experimental treatments, but nothing's working. David followed her down the hallway to a small room where several colonists lay in beds, their faces pale and gaunt, their breaths labored and shallow in earth. He asked quietly. David had cut off communication, Sophia said, her voice tight. We sent out a distress signal days ago, but there's been no response. It's as if they've abandoned us. David's jaw clenched. He had always suspected that Earth-South's elite had little interest in the survival of the Mars colony, viewing it as an expendable experiment. But to abandon them in the middle of a crisis, it was unforgivable. Then we were on our own, he said, the reality settling in like a weight on his chest. Sophia nodded grimly. That's why we need you. You've dealt with crises like this before. You know how to get people moving, how to organize and find solutions when everything seems hopeless. David stared at the faces of the dying colonists. The fear in their eyes mingled with a faint glimmer of hope. It was the same look he had seen on Earth so many times during his presidency. The look of people desperate for someone to save them. I'll need access to all the colony's resources, he said finally, and I'll need a team I can trust. Sophia's relief was palpable. You'll have it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. David took control of the situation with the same commanding presence he had once wielded on Earth. He reorganized the colony's infrastructure, creating quarantine zones, distributing scarce medical supplies, and rallying the colonists to work together. His first priority was finding a cure for dust fever, and for that he needed information, specifically the research data from Earth's top medical facility. But the more he dug into the situation, the more it became clear that this virus wasn't a natural occurrence. There were too many inconsistencies, too many signs that pointed to something more sinister. And when Elena Richter, the journalist who had followed him to Mars, approached him with her own findings, the full scope of the conspiracy began to unfold. I've been investigating the origins of dust fever, Elena said one evening as they met in a secluded corner of the colony. And I found something disturbing. This virus wasn't an accident. David, it was released deliberately. David's blood ran cold. By who? By Earth, as Elena said, her voice low. They want to destabilize the colony, make it ungovernable. They've been losing control over Mars, and they see this as a way to ensure they're dominant. If the colony falls apart, they can step in and take over under the guise of humanitarian aid. David stared at her, his mind reeling. He had always known that Earth's ruling class was ruthless, but this sacrificing lives for political gain, it was beyond monstrous. We need proof, he said, his voice tight with anger, something we can use to expose them. Elena nodded. I've been working on it, but we don't have much time. If we don't stop this virus soon, there won't be anyone left to save. David's thoughts raced. The stakes had just been raised. He wasn't just fighting a virus anymore. He was fighting a political conspiracy that threatened the very survival of the colony. He would need all his wits, all his experience to navigate the treacherous path ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of the man he used to be, the leader who had once inspired hope in millions. And now with Mars hanging in the balance, he knew he couldn't afford to fail again. David paced in his small quarters, his mind spinning with the enormity of the conspiracy Elena had just revealed. The implications were staggering. Earth had not only abandoned Mars, but they had actively engineered its destruction, all to secure political and economic control over the colony. The virus, dust fever, was their weapon, a silent killer designed to cripple Mars, leaving it vulnerable for a takeover. David could feel the old fire stirring inside him. The same burning need to act that had once propelled him through crisis after crisis as president. He had walked away from public life haunted by the weight of his failures. But here was an opportunity, now a responsibility to prevent something far worse than any political defeat. This was about survival, not just for himself, but for the thousands of colonists who had no idea they were pawns in a much larger game. He had to move quickly. The virus was spreading, and without immediate action, the colony would collapse. He reached for his communicator, calling Sophia. Meet me in the control room in 10 minutes, he said, his voice steady. We need to talk. 10 minutes later, David stood in front of a large digital map of the colony, highlighting the spread of the virus. Sophia arrived, looking exhausted but determined. She'd been working tirelessly to slow the progression of dust fever, but even her genius had limits. We're running out of time, Sophia said bluntly, scanning the data on the screen. If we don't find a cure soon, the entire colony will be infected within a matter of weeks. The quarantine zones are barely holding. David nodded. I know, but I think we were dealing with something more than a simple outbreak. He quickly filled her in on what Elena had uncovered. Sophia's face hardened as he spoke, her mind racing through the implications. So they engineered the virus. Deliberately, David confirmed. They want Mars to fail. If we collapse, they come in as saviors, bringing their aid and taking control. We need to expose them. But first, we need a cure, something to stop this, before they get what they want. Sophia stared at the map for a long moment. If this virus is engineered, that means there's some kind of weakness. There has to be a backdoor, a way to stop it. That's all I was hoping you'd say, David replied, a flicker of hope returning to his voice. We need access to Earth's medical research data, the classified files. Do you have any contacts left there? Anyone we can trust? Sophia considered this for a moment, her brow furrowing. I might know someone, but it's risky. Earth has cut off communication with Mars, and I doubt anyone loyal to the government will be eager to help us. Get in touch with them, David urged. We don't have any other option. Sophia nodded, already formulating a plan in her head. She left the control room without another word, her focus entirely on the task ahead. David, on the other hand, remained by the map, watching. As the red zones marking infected areas slowly expanded, time was running out. As he stood there, deep in thought, Colonel Adrian Ramirez entered the room. The hard-nosed leader of the colony's defense forces had never been one for subtlety, and tonight was no exception. You've got your hands full, Prescott, Ramirez said, his voice gruff. This colony sent on the verge of collapse, and you're talking about some conspiracy theory. We need order, not wild accusation. David turned to face him, his expression unreadable. It's not a theory. It's in the truth. Ramirez folded his arms, unimpressed. Even if it is what sure plan, stir up panic. We barely have enough men to keep the quarantine zone secure as it is. David took a deep breath. He understood Ramirez's frustration, but he also knew the stakes were too high to ignore. The virus was engineered. Earth cell leadership wants this colony to fall so they can seize control. If we don't stop it, we won't just lose lives. We'll lose Mars. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. And you expect me to believe that after everything that's happened, you want me to trust you again? David held his gaze. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to do what you've always done, protect this colony. But to do that, we need to work together. We can't afford to be divided right now. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, finally, Ramirez exhaled heavily and shook his head. Fine, I'll play along for now. But if this blows up in our faces, it's sent on you. David nodded. Fair enough. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Sophia worked tirelessly to establish contact with her Earth-based ally, a scientist named Dr. Marshall, who had once been a trusted colleague in the Federation's medical division. Meanwhile, David focused on keeping the colony together, organizing food and medical supply distributions, and coordinating efforts with the defense forces to maintain order. The virus, however, was relentless. More colonists fell ill, and the quarantine zones grew increasingly strained. Tensions rose as food and water shortages began to take hold, and the specter of civil unrest loomed on the horizon. Small groups of colonists, disillusioned by the lack of progress and desperate for answers, began to voice their anger openly. One evening, as David sat reviewing reports in his quarters, a knock at the door interrupted his thought. He opened it to find Alina standing there, her face flushed with urgency. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside. David gestured for her to sit. What is it? I feel up and digging deeper into the conspiracy, Alina said, lowering her voice. There's more to this than we realized. I've found evidence that the virus was developed long before the election. This plan was in motion for years, and it's a faction on Earth that has been waiting for the right moment to strike. David's stomach churned. How far does it go? Far enough that even some of your former allies were involved, Alina replied grimly. This wasn't true just about taking down the colony. It was about taking you down too. You were a threat to their long-term plan. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, but David knew better than to let it show. He had always suspected that the political games on Earth ran deeper than he could fully grasp, but this was personal. Do we have any proof? He asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil reeling inside him. Alina nodded. I've got records, communications between key figures, all of it. But we need a way to get this information out. If we don't, they'll destroy us before we have a chance. David seemed to embrace Sophia CR working on contacting someone who can help. We'll get this to Earth, but we need to stabilize the colony first. If we don't stop the virus, none of this will matter. Just as Elena opened her mouth to respond, the door to his quarters slid open again, and Sophia rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. I got through, she announced breathlessly. Dr. Marshall has the data we need. He's going to transmit everything in the next few hours, but we need to act fast. Earth is monitoring all communications. If they catch wind of this, they'll shut us down. David Suyat's heart leapt. This was the break they needed. Let's get it done. The next few hours passed in tense anticipation. Sophia coordinated with Dr. Marshall, securing the medical research they needed to develop a cure for dust fever. But the closer they got to finding a solution, the more dangerous the situation became. Earth's elite had already gone to great lengths to destroy Mars, and they wouldn't hesitate to finish the job if they realized their plan was unraveling. When the data finally arrived, Sophia wasted no time in analyzing it. The room was filled with a hushed tension as David, Ramirez, and Elena watched her work, their futures hanging on the results of her finding. After what felt like an eternity, Sophia straightened and turned to face them, her expression triumphant. "There is a way to neutralize the virus," she said, her voice filled with relief. "It's complicated, but with the right resources, we can produce an antidote." David's shoulders sagged with relief. "How long?" "A few days if everything goes smoothly," Sophia replied, "but we need full cooperation from the colony. No more infighting." Ramirez crossed his arms, his expression hard. "That's easier said than done. People are scared, and scared people don't listen to reason." David nodded. "Then we'll make them listen." As they prepared to roll out the plan to the colony, David couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't through yet. Earth's elite weren't the type to give up easily, and if they realized that Mars had a chance of survival, they would stop at nothing to ensure its destruction. But for the first time in a long while, David felt a spark of hope. The colony had been brought to the brink, but now they had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. It was up to him and the people around him to seize it. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The rain fell in heavy sheets against the windows of the presidential estate, a relentless reminder of the storm that had been brewing for months. James Harrison stood by the glass, staring out at the dark clouds rolling in over Washington, D.C. His reflection, gaunt and weary, mirrored back at him. He was no longer president, not after losing the most brutal election of his career. The weight of the defeat hung heavy on his shoulders, but what troubled him most wasn't the loss itself. It was the nagging suspicion that something far worse was at play. It wasn't just politics. He thought something deeper, something dangerous. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Harrison turned to see General Sarah DeWitt standing in the doorway. She had served as his most trusted military advisor, and though she wasn't in uniform tonight, her presence carried the same gravity it always had. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "I might as well have," Harrison replied, his voice tight. "What's the news?" "No, I just scanning the room for listening devices." Though she knew there wouldn't. "This came through our back channels. I thought you should see it before anyone else." Harrison took the file, flipping it open. His eyes widened as he read through the first few pages. It was a series of correspondence, secret meetings, and encrypted transmissions between the newly elected president, Victor Caulfield's administration, and an alien race known as the Zenithians. Harrison had heard of the Zenithians before everyone had. They were the alien diplomats who had arrived in Earth's orbit years ago, offering peace and technology in exchange for cooperation. But this was something different. They not just allies, Harrison muttered, reading further. They controlling things, dictating terms. DeWitt nodded grimly. Caulfield's administration signed a secret pact with the Zenithians, one that essentially hands over control of Earth's resources and people. In exchange, the Zenithians have promised technological advancements, but at a cost. The people of Earth will become little more than laborers, pawns in the Zenithians' galactic empire. Harrison's stomach churned. He had suspected corruption, but nothing on this scale. Does anyone else know? Not yet. DeWitt said, "I brought this to you first because, well, I trust you, James. You need to do something." "Do something," Harrison scoffed, slamming the file shut. "I am not president anymore. Caulfield controls the government. He controls everything now. But you still have people," DeWitt said, her voice firm, "people who believe in you, people who know what kind of man Caulfield is." Harrison rubbed a hand over his face, his mind racing. He thought about the millions of people who had voted for him, the ones who believed in his message of independence and strength. He couldn't let them down, not when the stakes were this high. But to go up against Caulfield, to fight an entire government and an alien force, it was a suicide mission. But what choice did he have? I'll need more proof, Harrison said, finally, his voice low. We can just go public with this without something solid to back it up. DeWitt smiled, a glint of steel in her eyes. I thought you might say that. I've already got a lead on where we can find the original treaty documents. We'll need a team, though, a small one, discreet. Harrison nodded, his mind already forming a plan. We'll need to move quickly. If Caulfield or the Zenithians catch wind of this, they won't deteriorate, assured him. Not if we were careful. Harrison took a deep breath, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a fight worth winning. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about freedom, about the future of humanity. I am in, he said, his voice resolute. Let's take them down. 2 days later, Harrison found himself in a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, the faint hum of generators providing the only sound. It was the kind of place where deals were made in the shadows, far from the prying eyes of the government. DeWitt had gathered a small team of trusted allies for the mission. There was David Cypher Morales, a hacker with a reputation for getting into places no one else could, and Evelyn Graves, a former intelligence officer who had worked closely with Harrison during his presidency. They were the best of the best, and more importantly, they were loyal. We've got one shot at this, DeWitt said, her voice low as the team huddled around a table strewn with maps and blueprints. The facility we retargeting is a Zenithian-controlled site, heavily guarded, but they won TB expecting that. They've already infiltrated that deep, Harrison asked, his brows furrowing. They've embedded themselves in key infrastructure, Evelyn replied. Mostly under the radar, Caulfield says. Administration is helping cover their track. If we can get into the facility, we should be able to access the original treaty documents and get out before they even know we were there. Harrison nodded, studying the map. What is our entry point? Cypher leaned forward, tapping a spot on the map. There is a service tunnel here, used for maintenance. It's ours off the books. No security cameras. We'll go in through there, grab the documents, and get out. Sounds simple enough, Harrison said, though he knew nothing was ever that simple. The team moved quickly, preparing their gear and finalizing the plan. Harrison felt the weight of what they were about to do, pressing down on him. This wasn't just a mission. It was a rebellion. If they were caught, there would be no trial, no second chances. But if they succeeded, they could expose the greatest betrayal in human history. The service tunnel was narrow and dark, the sound of dripping water echoing through the concrete wall. Harrison led the way, his pulse quickening with every step. DeWitt and Cypher followed close behind, their footsteps silent in the gloom. They moved with practiced precision, navigating the twists and turns of the tunnel until they reached a heavy metal door. Cypher knelt in front of the door, pulling out a small device from his pack. Give me a minute, he muttered, his fingers flying over the keypad. After a few tense seconds, there was a soft click, and the door slid open. They stepped into a dimly lit corridor, the air cold and sterile. Harrison's heart raced as they moved deeper into the facility, the weight of the mission heavy on his mind. This was it, the moment of truth. The room they were looking for was at the end of the corridor, a small, unassuming office that held the key to everything. Harrison and DeWitt stood guard while Cypher went to work on the terminal inside, his fingers dancing over the holographic display. Got it, Cypher whispered, after a few moments, his voice tight with excitement. I forgot the treaty. Harrison felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. A sudden alarm blared through the facility, red lights flashing as the walls vibrated with the sound of approaching footsteps. They know we were here, DeWitt said, her voice tense. We forgot to move. Cypher, send the data to our secure link, Harrison ordered. We'll hold them off. As Cypher worked to upload the files, Harrison and DeWitt took positions near the entrance, weapons drawn. Zenithian guards rounded the corner, their sleek, armored forms shimmering in the red emergency light. Harrison fired first, the crack of gunfire echoing through the corridor. The Zenithians moved with inhuman speed, returning fire with energy weapons that hummed with lethal power. DeWitt took down 2 of them with precise shots, but more kept coming, their eyes glowing with a cold, predatory light. We were outnumbered, DeWitt shouted over the noise. We just need more time. Harrison yelled back, reloading his weapon as another guard fell. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal, the firefight escalating with every second. Harrison's breath came in, ragged gasps as he fired again, the sharp recoil of his weapon jarring his shoulder. The Zenithians kept coming, their movements fluid and calculated, as if each one was part of a larger collective mind. Harrison had faced his share of enemies in his time, but nothing quite like this. These weren't cheese soldiers. They were predators. Cypher Dawit shouted over the gunfire, glancing back toward the small office where Cypher was furiously typing away. How much longer? Almost there, Cypher called out, his voice strained with concentration. The flickering red light of the alarm reflected off his sweat-slicked face as he worked to finish the data transfer. Harrison took down another Zenithian. The alien saw body crumpling to the floor with a dull thud. But it wasn't enough. More of them were coming faster than they could take them down. They were going to overrun us, DeWitt shouted, her voice tight with frustration. Then we hold them off as long as we can. Harrison growled, his eyes narrowing. He fired again, his aim steady despite the chaos around them. A Zenithian broke through the line, its elongated limbs moving in a blur as it closed the distance between them. Harrison barely had time to react before it was on him, its sharp claw-like fingers slashing through the air. He dodged to the side, feeling the razor-sharp edge of the alien-set claws graze his arm. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to slow down. With a quick movement, he brought his weapon up and fired point-blank into the Zenithian's chest. The creature let out a high-pitched shriek before collapsing in a heap at his feet. "Got it," Cypher shouted triumphantly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Then move," Harrison barked, grabbing Cypher by the arm and pulling him toward the exit. DeWitt was already ahead of them, her weapon blazing as she cleared a path through the remaining Zenithian. They sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor as they raced toward the service tunnel. The moment they burst through the door and into the relative safety of the tunnel, Cypher sealed it behind them, the heavy metal barrier slamming shut with a satisfying clang. The sounds of the Zenithians pounding on the other side echoed through the tunnel, but for now they were safe. Harrison leaned against the wall, panting. His arm throbbed from the Zenithian to his slash, but it wasn't deep enough to slow him down. He looked over at Cypher, who was hunched over, hands on his knees as he tried to catch his breath. "Did you get everything?" Harrison asked, his voice low and steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through it. Cypher nodded, holding up a small data drive. "Everything, the entire treaty. Once we get this out, the world will know." Harrison exhaled slowly, feeling a small sense of victory creep in. But it was short-lived. They weren't out of the woods yet. The Zenithians would be hunting them now, and it was only a matter of time before they tracked them down. "We need to move," Dispute said, pushing off the wall and straightening her jacket. "We've got to get this to a secure location before they cut us off." Harrison nodded in agreement. There was no time to waste. With Cypher leading the way, they moved quickly through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Harrison's mind raced with possibilities, trying to think several steps ahead. They had the proof they needed, but exposing the truth was going to take more than just sending a file. Caulfield and the Zenithians controlled the media, the government, everything. If they didn't handle this carefully, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line. It would be the entire planet. When they finally emerged from the tunnel into the cold night air, the city was quiet, the storm from earlier having passed. But the tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a much larger storm. Harrison led them toward a nondescript black Suva parked near the edge of the lot. They piled in, DeWitt taking the wheel as Cypher slid into the back seat, clutching the data drive like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Where to?" DeWitt asked, glancing at Harrison in the rearview mirror. "There's a safe house about 20 miles from here," Harrison replied. "It's off the grid. We can regroup there and figure out our next move." DeWitt nodded and hit the gas, the Suva roaring to life as they sped away from the warehouse. The city lights blurred past them, a reminder of the world they were fighting to protect. Harrison stared out the window, his mind already turning over the next step. They had the proof. Now they just needed to get it out to the people. But something gnawed at him. Something about the mission didn't sit right. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a chime from Cypher Establishment. The hacker pulled it out, his face going pale as he stared at the screen. We've got a problem," Cypher muttered, his voice tight. "What is it?" Harrison asked, leaning forward. "Retracking us," Cypher said, holding up the tablet to show a blinking red dot on a map of the city. "The Zenithians have a tracer on us. They know exactly where we are." "Damn it!" Harrison cursed, his mind racing. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Cypher replied. "They were closing in fast." DeWitt tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her jaw set. We need to lose them now. She swerved the chauffeur onto a side street, the tires screeching as they veered off the main road. Harrison gritted his teeth, his hand instinctively moving to the weapon at his side. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They should have been in the clear by now, safely off the grid. But the Zenithians were relentless, and they weren't going to stop until Harrison and his team were either dead or captured. As they sped through the narrow streets, Cypher's tablet beeped again, and his face paled further. "Vivette got drones on us," Cypher said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've got maybe a minute before they ray right on top of us." Harrison South's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the drones, not in the Suvo. They needed a plan, and fast. There, Harrison said, pointing to an alleyway up ahead. "Turn there, we'll go on foot." DeWitt didn't hesitate, yanking the wheel to the right and sending the sewer skidding into the alley. The moment the vehicle came to a stop, Harrison was out, his weapon in hand as he scanned the area. The alley was dark, narrow, but there were enough places to hide at least for a little while. "Move, move," Harrison urged, gesturing for Cypher and DeWitt to follow. They scrambled out of the SUV, ducking into the shadows as the distant hum of the drones grew louder. The whirring sound was unmistakable, like the buzzing of a giant mechanical hornet. They crouched behind a stack of crates, the cold air biting at their skin as the drones passed overhead. Harrison held his breath, listening to the sound of the drones sweeping the area. His pulse pounded in his ears, but he forced himself to stay calm. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The drones hovered for what felt like an eternity before finally moving on, their red lights disappearing into the distance. "We can stay here," DeWitt whispered, her eyes scanning the darkened alley. "They'll be back." "I know," Harrison replied, his voice low, "but we need to get to the safe house without leading them straight to it." Cypher glanced around nervously, clutching the data drive to his chest. "How do we lose them? They've got every eye in the sky on us." Harrison thought for a moment, his mind racing. "We split up," he said finally. "I'll lead them away, buy you time to get to the safe house." DeWitt frowned. "James, that's suicide." "Maybe," Harrison said with a grim smile, "but it's the only way. You need to get that data to a secure location. Without it, none of this matters." DeWitt opened her mouth to argue, but Harrison cut her off with a look. "I'll meet you at the safe house when it's clear." There was a tense moment of silence before DeWitt finally nodded. "Be careful." Harrison gave her a brief nod before slipping into the shadows, his weapon held tight in his hand. The sound of the drones grew distant as he moved through the alley, his mind focused on the task ahead. He needed to draw the Zenithians away, give DeWitt and Cypher enough time to escape. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only one they had. As Harrison disappeared into the night, the weight of the mission settled over him once more. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the future of humanity, and he wasn't going to let them down. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Ethan Grant stood silently in the dim cell, his back pressed against the cold, metallic wall. The hum of alien machinery reverberated through the prison, a constant reminder of the inescapable truth he had been abandoned. The former president of Earth, once a symbol of hope and unity, now found himself exiled to an alien prison on a desolate moon, light years away from his home. His eyes scanned the small, windowless room, the pale blue light casting eerie shadows on the wall. The air was cold, biting at his skin through the thin prison uniform they had forced on him. Ethan had been president for 8 years, a beacon of leadership in an era of instability, only to be betrayed by his own government after losing his re-election. It wasn't just political betrayal. They had feared him, feared what he knew about the extraterrestrial entities influencing Earth. And now he was here, forgotten by the world, locked away with Earth. Most dangerous mind. He clenched his jaw, the weight of it all settling into his bones. But this wasn't. To the end, he refused to let it be. The heavy clanking of the cell door sliding open caught his attention. 2 figures stood in the doorway, their silhouettes framed by the dim light of the hallway. One of them, a tall woman with sharp features and short, unkempt hair, stepped forward, her piercing gaze fixed on him. Ethan straightened, his eyes narrowing. "I am, and you..." Dr. Helena Moss, she replied curtly. I heard rumors they locked you up here. Didn't you think it was true? Ethan crossed his arms, eyeing the second figure, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running down the side of his face. He recognized him immediately. Jack Harper, decorated military strategist. What are you doing in this place? Jack's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Let's just say I didn't see eye to eye with Earth's new leadership. Got me exiled like the rest of the dangerous mind. Ethan nodded, understanding all too well. It was no coincidence they were here. Earth's new government had rounded up anyone who posed a threat: scientists, soldiers, thinkers, and locked them away, hoping to bury their talents and ideas forever. They're scared, Ethan said, breaking the silence. They know what, soon they'll come in. Helena raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? There's a war coming, Ethan replied, his voice low but firm. The Jarlin are planning an invasion of Earth. I've seen the intelligence. They're remanipulating Earth and politics, weakening us from within. And by locking us up here, they've removed the only people who can stop them. Jack's face hardened, the weight of the revelation sinking in. So what do we do? Ethan stepped forward, his gaze locking with Helena S. and Jack said, we get out of here, we escape this prison, and we return to Earth to stop the Zakalin. Helena let out a short, humorless laugh. Escape? You've seen this place, it's impenetrable. Every prison has its weaknesses, Ethan said, a spark of determination flickering in his eye. And we have the combined intellect and skill to find it, but it'll need to work together. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the weight of the task ahead of them pressing down. Helena crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing in thought. This isn't just about escape. Is it you were talking about taking on an entire alien empire? Ethan met her gaze, his expression resolute. I am, and if we don't, Tyreth won. I stand a chance. Jack grunted, crossing his arms. We were going to need more than just the three of us. There are others, Ethan said. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, all locked up in this prison. We find them, and we form an alliance. Helena glanced at Jack, then back at Ethan. You were serious about this? Dead serious, Ethan replied. We might have been abandoned, forgotten by Earth, but we're not done. We still have a chance to fight back. Helena sighed, running a hand through her hair. All right, I am it. Jack nodded, a grim smile on his face. Let's do it. Over the next few days, Ethan, Helena, and Jack quietly began gathering a small group of prisoners, carefully selecting individuals with the skills they would need. Among them were engineers, tacticians, and even a hacker who had been imprisoned for attempting to expose government secrets. They met in the shadows in the quiet corners of the prison, where the alien guards rarely ventured, whispering plans and strategy. The prison was a technological marvel, its walls reinforced with alien alloys, its security system a web of sensors and energy shield. But it wasn't perfect. Ethan and his alliance began to uncover small weaknesses, chinks in the armor that they could exploit. Dr. Moss, brilliant and methodical, had taken the lead on understanding the prison security system. She spent hours analyzing the prison infrastructure, identifying potential vulnerabilities. The mainframe controls everything, she explained one evening as the group huddled together in a dimly lit maintenance room. If we can hack into it, we can disable the energy shields that keep us trapped. Jack, ever the strategist, frowned as he studied the rough map of the prison they had cobbled together. Getting to the mainframe wouldn't be easy. It's in the heart of the prison, heavily guarded. We'll need a diversion. Ethan nodded. We'll create one. We can sabotage the prison, zone power supply, force a temporary shutdown. It'll give us a window to access the mainframe and disable the shield. Helena glanced at Ethan, her expression skeptical. Even if we manage to disable the shields, how do we get out there? No way we were just walking out the front door. We won, Ethan replied. There's a hangar on the eastern side of the prison. It's ours, where they keep the transport ships. Once the shields are down, we take one of the ships and get off this rock. Silence fell over the group as they considered the plan. It was risky, dangerous, and hinged on perfect timing, but it was the only chance they had. I'll need time, Helena said, her voice steady, hacking into the mainframe. Be easy, and I'll need a team to help me. I'll handle the sabotage, Jack said. I can take a team to the power supply. We'll create the diversion. Ethan looked around at the group, his heart swelling with pride. These people had been discarded, forgotten by the world, but they were far from broken. They were fighters, survivors, and they were ready to take their fate into their own hand. "All right," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We move tomorrow night. Make your preparations. This is our only shot." The night of the escape arrived quickly. The prison was eerily quiet, the cold hum of alien technology the only sound in the air. Ethan stood with Helena, Jack, and the rest of their group in a darkened corridor, the tension palpable. "Remember," Ethan whispered, "stick to the plan. Timing is everything." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "We'll be in position at the power supply. You'll get your diversion." Helena adjusted the small device strapped to her wrist, a makeshift hacking tool she had built from scraps. "I'll need 10 minutes in the mainframe, no more." Ethan's eyes met hers and he nodded. "You'll get your 10 minutes. With a final nod, Jack and his team disappeared down the corridor, heading for the power supply. Ethan, Helena, and the rest of the group moved in the opposite direction, their footsteps silent as they made their way toward the mainframe. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every step felt like a gamble, every sound like a potential threat. The alien guards were patrolling, but they had chosen their moment carefully during the shift change, when the prison's security would be at its weakest. As they neared the mainframe room, Ethan Cyrus' heart pounded in his chest. This was it. If they were caught now, it would all be over. Helena moved to the door, her fingers flying across the small device on her wrist. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the mainframe room beyond. It was a sterile metallic space filled with rows of alien consoles and glowing screens. Ethan followed Helena into the mainframe room, his gaze darting around the space. The glow from the alien consoles cast an eerie light over the room. Helena moved quickly, her fingers flying over the interface, her brow furrowed in concentration. Ethan kept his eyes on the entrance, nerves on edge, as the seconds ticked by. "How long?" he whispered. "Just a few minutes." Helena muttered, not looking up. "The system is more complex than I thought. It's not just about disabling the shields. We'll need to reroute the entire security grid to avoid triggering an alarm." Ethan clenched his fists, his body tensing as he kept an ear out for the sound of approaching guard. The silence was oppressive, each second feeling longer than the last. He could almost hear the ticking of an invisible clock, counting down to the moment everything could go wrong. Suddenly, Helena cursed under her breath. Damn it. I need a bypass. This thing has layers of encryption. Ethan leaned closer. "Can you do it?" Helena shot him a look. "I am the best there is, but I am gonna need a little more time. Tell Jack to hold off on the sabotage for another 5 minutes." Ethan quickly tapped a message into his communicator, sending a signal to Jack or his team. The response came almost instantly. "No more time. Power going down in 60 seconds. Ethan's pulse quickened. "We'd only have 5 minutes. We've got 60 seconds. Helena's eyes widened, her fingers moving even faster. Sweat beaded on her forehead as the seconds slipped away. Ethan saw its hot hammered in his chest, knowing the power would cut soon, plunging the prison into chaos. They had to be ready. 30 seconds, he hissed. "I know," Helena snapped, her voice tight with frustration. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed in the final command. The main console beeped and the alien language on the screen shifted. "I got it," she breathed. The room suddenly went dark as the power cut. Ethan's cell world plunged into blackness for a heartbeat, the air feeling thick and heavy. Then the emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a faint red glow. The low hum of the prison systems became an erratic pulse as the sabotage took effect. Helena looked up at Ethan, her face illuminated by the crimson light. "The shields are down and the security grid sats offline. We've only got 10 minutes before backup systems kick in." Ethan nodded sharply. "Let's move." They sprinted down the corridor, heading for the hangar. Alarms began to blare, distant shouts echoing through the prison as the guards realized something was wrong. Ethan's group moved swiftly, navigating the maze like halls with precision. Helena's team of engineers had memorized the prison quote and now it was paying off. They reached the hangar just as the first wave of guards appeared at the far end of the corridor. "They've re-onto us," one of the engineers shouted, panic rising in his voice. Ethan turned to Jack, who had just arrived from the power station, his face grim. "See, we'll hold them off. You and Helena get the ship ready." Jack's team formed a defensive line at the entrance to the hangar, weapons drawn. Ethan watched as Helena ran toward the alien transport ship. It was sleek and unfamiliar, its sharp angles glinting in the dim emergency light. The ship was their ticket out of here, but getting it airborne wouldn't be easy. We need to disable the hangar lockdown, Helena shouted as she and her team scrambled toward the ship. Carried it still sealed shut. Ethan cursed under his breath. There was no time to spare. The guards were closing in fast, their alien weapons humming with deadly energy. Jack's team opened fire, the air erupting in bursts of plasma and energy bolts. The sound was deafening, and Ethan could feel the heat of the blasts as they narrowly missed him. Helena, Ethan shouted over the noise. I am working on it. She yelled back, frantically, typing commands into the ship's side console. Ty, just keep them off me for a few more seconds. Ethan turned back toward the firefight, his heart pounding in his chest. Jack's team was holding the line, but they were outnumbered. The alien guards moved with precision, their sleek armor reflecting the flashing lights of the battle. One of the guards broke through the line, charging at Ethan with an energy blade. Ethan barely had time to react, raising his weapon and firing a shot that sent the guard crashing to the ground. Doors are opening, Helena shouted triumphantly. Ethan glanced over his shoulder just in time to see the massive hangar doors begin to slide open, revealing the starry void beyond. The ship's engines roared to life, their deep hum vibrating through the floor. Everyone get to the ship, Ethan shouted. Jack's team began to fall back, retreating toward the ship as the guards continued their advance. Plasma fire rained down around them, and Ethan could feel the heat as a bolt of energy whizzed past his ear. He fired another shot, taking down a guard who had been about to flank Jack. The group scrambled up the ramp into the ship, the alien craft, its interior lit by a faint blue glow. Ethan was the last to board, his hand gripping the side of the ramp as he pulled himself up. He could hear the guards shouting behind him, their footsteps growing louder as they approached. As soon as Ethan was aboard, the ship hatch doors slammed shut. Helena was already in the pilot X seat, her hands flying over the controls. Hurry, hold on, Tua, she shouted. The ship lurched as it lifted off the ground, its engines roaring. Ethan stumbled but caught himself gripping a nearby console as the ship accelerated toward the open hangar door. Plasma bolts recatted off the ship, Seth's hull, but the shields held. They shot out of the hangar and into the cold expanse of space, the alien moon quickly shrinking behind them. For a moment there was silence, the stillness of space settling around them like a blanket. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his chest finally releasing. But the moment of calm was short-lived. A warning beeped on the console and Helena Sal's face tightened. We've got company alien fighters heading right for us. Ethan cursed. How many? 3, maybe 4, Helena replied, her fingers flying over the controls as she adjusted their trajectory. We can outrun them if I can get us into warp. Are they reclosing fast? Do it, Ethan said, his voice firm. We need to get back to Earth, and we need to do it fast. Helena nodded, her focus entirely on the task at hand. The ship's engines whined as they pushed to full throttle, the stars outside blurring as they picked up speed. The alien fighters were closing in, their sleek forms darting through space like predatory birds. Ethan felt the ship shudder as the first fighter fired, the impact sending a violent jolt through the cabin. Shields holding, Helena muttered, her voice tense. Pray, but they won. To last long, under sustained fire. Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. They couldn't afford to get caught now, not when they were so close to escaping. He moved to the weapons console, quickly scanning the unfamiliar controls. I am going to see if I can return fire. Keep us steady. The ship shook again as another blast hit them. Helena gritted her teeth, her eyes never leaving the view ahead. Asen, I need that warp drive ready or we're dead in the water. A minute, Ethan said, his fingers moving quickly over the control. He activated the ship's weapon systems, aiming at the nearest fighter. A volley of plasma bolts shot from their ship, narrowly missing the alien fighter as it banked sharply to avoid the fire. The fighter returned fire, another blast slamming into their ship. Ethan felt the heat of the impact, the hull groaning under the strain. He fired again, this time scoring a hit on the fighter's swing. The alien craft spiraled out of control, veering away into the darkness of space. One down, Ethan muttered, his focus sharp. Hold on, Helena shouted suddenly. Ethan braced himself as the ship jolted violently, the stars outside warping into streaks of light as Helena activated the warp drive. The alien fighters disappeared behind them, left in the dust as they rocketed toward Earth. The cabin was filled with a tense silence once more, only the hum of the engines breaking the quiet. Ethan leaned back in his seat, his chest rising and falling as the adrenaline began to fade. They had done it. They had escaped. But as the weight of the situation settled in, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. They were headed back to a world that had forgotten them, a world that didn't know the danger it was in. He glanced at Helena, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the console. She caught his eye and gave him a small nod. They were in this together now, and there was no turning back. "We were coming for you, Earth," Ethan muttered under his breath, a steely resolve settling in his chest, and we were going to win. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The cold winds of the distant planet Arden lapped against the windows of the secluded cabin where Jack Hendricks sat, staring at the crackling fire. The flames danced, flickering reflections in his tired blue eyes, but no warmth could touch the void in his heart. He had once been the president, the leader of the most powerful alliance of human colonies in the galaxy. But that seemed like a lifetime ago now. After losing his re-election campaign, he had retreated into the shadows, a ghost of his former self. His world had grown smaller, quieter, and painfully irrelevant. He sipped from a glass of aged whiskey, feeling its sharp bite on his tongue. The galaxy had moved on without him. It always did. Power was like water. It flowed to whoever held the largest dam. Hendricks had lost that dam when the people turned their backs on him, choosing someone else to lead. He thought he'd made peace with it until the message came. A soft chime echoed through the room, interrupting his thought. He frowned and glanced at the encrypted tablet lying on the table. The comm systems were supposed to be secure, isolated even, but somehow someone had reached him. Slowly, he placed the glass down and picked up the tablet, pressing his thumb against the interface to unlock it. The familiar face of General Elia Mason filled the screen. Even though the message was pre-recorded, her expression was tense, the lines on her forehead deeper than he remembered. Elia had been his most trusted military advisor, a woman who had shared the burden of leadership during the darkest days of his presidency. Jack, her voice, though, recorded, carried a weight that cut through the digital barrier. "I know you wanted to disappear, but we don't have that luxury anymore. You need to see this." The screen shifted to a series of images, satellite photos, reports, and schematic. At first, it didn't make sense to him, just another batch of military intel, but then the image of a massive weapon caught his eye, his breath hitched. "The Omega Cannon Dolores," voice continued. "It exists, and it's worse than we imagined. Governor Kyle has it, and he's planning to use it. Jack, you know what this means? We need you. The galaxy needs you. Contact me if you're ready." The screen flickered back to her face. "I know you said you were done fighting, but you were the only one who can stop him." Hendricks let the tablet fall from his hands, his mind spinning. Omega Cannon, a super weapon capable of destroying entire planets, was supposed to be a myth, a deterrent, an idea to keep rogue factions in check. But if Elora was right, if Carcil, the dictator who ruled the planet Phyrexan with an iron fist, had control of it, the consequences were too horrifying to contemplate. He stood up, the weight of the decision pressing down on his chest. Could he really walk away from this? He had promised himself he would never return to that life. The political games, the impossible choices, the deaths he couldn't prevent. But how could he turn his back on a threat that could wipe out millions, maybe billions? The fire crackled behind him, but Hendricks felt nothing but cold. He stared out the window, the vast expanse of Arden, a frozen wilderness stretching endlessly before him. The decision had already been made, hadn't it? Even if he wanted to stay hidden, he continued not. With a deep breath, he activated the secure comm link on his tablet. Alarice's fee appeared. "Live this time. Tell me everything," he said, his voice steady though inside. The storm had already begun. The old crew assembled quickly. Hendricks wasn't sure if it was a testament to their loyalty or to the gravity of the situation, but within days, they were all together again, each bringing their own set of skills to the mission. The ship they commandeered was a stealth-class frigate, fast, nimble, and perfect for the kind of infiltration they were planning. Elora was the first aboard. The general hadn't changed much. Her posture still screamed military discipline, and her eyes still carried the weight of too many battles fought. She nodded at Hendricks as she walked up the ramp. "Hell of a way to get the band back together," she said, her tone dry, but her expression softened as she met his gaze. Are you sure you were ready for this? But that never stopped me before. Next came Riley Cade, the hacker who had been responsible for more classified leaks than Hendricks cared to remember. He had a grin plastered across his face, a cocky swagger in his step, but beneath the bravado, Hendricks knew Riley's sound mind was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Man, I never thought I'd see you again, Jack. Thought you'd retired to a beach somewhere with a couple of those drinks with the little umbrellas. Tidy Riley clapped Hendricks on the shoulder as he boarded. I am not much of an umbrella guy. Riley smirked. Good to know. Dr. Erlin Grace, the scientist and engineer who had designed many of the weapons and defense systems used in Hendricks' administration, was the last to arrive. She was quiet, introspective, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Her knowledge of planetary defenses would be crucial to disabling the Omega cannon, and Hendricks knew they would need every ounce of her brilliance. When Zara Kylene, the infiltration specialist, finally joined them on board, there was a moment of tension. Zara had been a mercenary before joining Hendricks' team during the height of his presidency. She was good at what she did, too good, perhaps, but there was always something about her Hendricks couldn't fully trust. He had kept her at arm's length before, and he felt that same instinct flare now. Nice crew, Zara said, eyeing the others as she stepped inside. Ari, what's the plan, boss? Hendricks took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the mission settling over them like a storm cloud. The plan is simple, he said. We go in, disable the Omega cannon, and take out Kyle before he has the chance to fire it. No mistake. Riley raised an eyebrow. The ship hummed to life as they lifted off from the barren surface of Arden. Hendricks stood at the helm, staring out into the vast expanse of space. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to wonder if he had made the right choice, but there was no turning back now. As they streaked through the stars toward Phyrexin, Hendricks couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mission was dangerous, yes, but it was more than that. There were too many variables, too many unknowns, and Zara was a wild card. Phyrexin loomed ahead of them, a planet shrouded in darkness, its cities encased in iron and steel, the mark of a world under Kaol's oppressive rule. Hendricks could feel the tension in the air as they prepared to enter the planet's atmosphere. Riley tapped away at his console, working to bypass the planetary defense system. Give me a minute, and I'll get us through. Without setting off any alarms, Turahi muttered, Locks. The ship jolted slightly as they broke through the atmosphere, but they remained undetected. The city below them was a sprawling mass of industrial complexes and military fortification. Hendricks couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. This was Kalos' domain and they were trespassing. Landing zone ahead, Riley said. Looks like an old maintenance facility. Should be quiet. The ship descended smoothly, landing with barely a sound. Hendricks stood, checking his sidearm. This is it? He said, we get in, disable the weapon, and get out. No heroic. The team nodded, and they moved out into the shadows of Phyrexin. The infiltration went smoothly at first, too smoothly, Hendricks thought. They moved through the lower levels of the city, avoiding detection with Riley's help as he hacked into security feeds and rerouted patrol. But then everything went wrong. They were halfway to the Citadel when alarms blared through the city. Red lights flashed, and the sound of boots on metal echoed through the narrow corridor. We've even made it. Bella growling. Sci-FiMovies. The team sprinted through the industrial maze, dodging guards and ducking under pipes as they made their way toward the Citadel. The air was thick with tension, and Hendricks could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. And then as they neared the control room, Zara turned on them. A knife flashed in the dim light, and Hendricks barely had time to react as Zara lunged at him. Alara tackled her, and the two women crashed to the ground in a flurry of punches and kicks. You were always too trusting, Zora sneered as she fought. Not anymore. The fight was brutal, and Hendricks watched in shock as the woman he had once called an ally tried to kill them. But Alara was faster, stronger, and she managed to pin Zara to the ground, her knee pressed against Zara's throat. You picked the wrong side. Zia's eyes flickered with defiance before they dulled. The fight was over, but the damage was done. She was working for Karale, Alara said, breathing heavily as she stood. We need to move. They rushed into the control room, but Hendricks couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The door to the control room slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast chamber filled with consoles, holographic displays, and the soft hum of machinery. At the far end, the ominous shape of the Omega Cannon SAS control system loomed like a predator waiting to strike. Hendricks took a deep breath, his mind racing through the plan. It was supposed to be simple: disable the weapon and take out Carol, but with Zara, step betrayal, the odds had tilted dangerously against them. "Riley, get us access," Hendricks ordered, his voice sharp. Riley was already at a terminal, his fingers flying across the controls as he bypassed the security system. Alara stood watch near the door, her blaster drawn and her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The tension was palpable, the sound of Riley, typing the only noise, cutting through the thick air. "I am," and Riley muttered, his eyes focused on the screen. "This thing's got layers of encryption, but I can shut it down. Just need a few minutes." Hendricks nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. "You've got two. We can't afford any more delay." He paced the room, his eyes darting between the control panels and the massive weapon displayed in the center. The Omega Cannon looked even more monstrous up close, its sleek design and terrifying potential making it clear just how much power Carol had seized. If they didn't stop him, entire worlds would be obliterated with the press of a button. "Got it," Riley said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "I then disabled the targeting system. The cannon sits dead in the water." Hendricks allowed himself a brief sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. A cold, mocking voice filled the room, echoing off the metal walls like a sinister melody. Well, what do we have here?" The fallen president and his band of misfits. Hendricks turned slowly, his heart sinking as Governor Carroll stepped out from the shadows, flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. The dictator's smirk was as sharp as the blade he carried at his side. His dark, regal armor gleamed under the dim lights, and his eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Hendricks with a gaze that promised nothing but death. Theo clapped his hands slowly, mockingly. "I must say I am impressed. You managed to get this far. You'd really think I wouldn't." Hendricks did he flinch? "You were too late, Carol. The Omega Cannon is disabled." Carel's smile widened. "Oh, Jack, you always were too sentimental for your own good. Do you think I'd trust a single system to control the most powerful weapon in the galaxy?" He gestured toward the control panel Riley had just hacked. "That's only part of it. There's secondary failsafe, one that you will never reach in time." Riley's face drained of color. He sensed bluffing. He muttered under his breath, but even he sound convinced. Carell took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "No bluff, Mr. Cadade. The failsafe is buried deep within the cannon's core. It will activate automatically in 5 minutes, and when it does," he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Hendricks' mind raced. 5 minutes. That wasn't enough time. They couldn't possibly reach the core and stop the failsafe before the cannon went online. Desperation clawed at him, but he shoved it down. This wasn't over yet. He glanced at Alara, who had already moved to position herself between Carol and the rest of the team. Her posture was tense, ready for the fight she knew was coming. "Get to the core," Hendricks said, his voice low but firm. "I'll handle crap." Alara's eyes widened in protest. Gole barked, cutting her off. "That sent an order." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding and turning to Riley. "Come on, we've got work to do." Riley followed her without a word, and Dr. Grace fell in behind them. Hendricks watched them go, his heart pounding as they disappeared through a side door, leaving him alone with Carol and his guard. Kyle chuckled softly, drawing his blade. "Always the martyr, Jack. You never did learn when to quit." Hendricks coiled his shoulders, his eyes locking onto the dictator. "I never quit on the people I swore to protect. That's the difference between you and me." Kyle's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, murderous glare. "We'll see about that." The next moment exploded into chaos. Carol lunged forward, his blade flashing toward Hendricks in a blur of deadly precision. Hendricks barely had time to dodge, his body moving on instinct as he rolled to the side and fired his blaster. The shot went wide, but it was enough to force Carell back, giving Hendricks a moment to regroup. The guards moved in, but Hendricks was ready. He fired off 2 more shots, dropping one of them before they could close the distance. The second guard swung at him with a stun baton, but Hendricks ducked, delivering a swift punch to the man's gut before finishing him with a blaster shot to the chest. Gale snarled in frustration and lunged again, his blade arcing toward Hendricks' throat. This time, Hendricks was ready. He sidestepped the attack and swung his blaster upward, knocking the blade from Kyrell's hand. But Kyrell was faster than Hendricks had anticipated. He recovered almost instantly, delivering a brutal punch to Hendricks' jaw that sent him stumbling back. Hendricks tasted blood as he wiped his mouth, glaring at the dictator. "You're running out of time. Kyrell, you'll never win." Kyrell sneered, his breath coming in short, furious bursts. "I don't need time. I just need you dead." With a roar, Kyrell charged again, but this time, Hendricks didn't give him the chance to get close. He aimed his blaster and fired the shot, catching Kyrell in the shoulder and sending him crashing to the ground with a cry of pain. The dictator's blade clattered to the floor, and for a brief moment, everything went still. Hendricks stepped forward, his blaster trained on Kyrell's chest. "It's done over." But Kyrell just laughed, the sound low and hollow. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea what's coming, Jack. Even if you stop the Omega cannon, you can stop what's on next." Hendricks' finger tightened on the trigger. "Watch me." Before he could fire, the door behind him burst open, and Alara and the others rushed back into the room, their faces pale and strained. "We've got a problem," Alara said breathlessly. "We can shut down the core. The failsafe's already in place. It's gonna go off." Hendricks felt a cold knot of dread settle in his gut. How long? 2 minutes, maybe less. He glanced at Kyrell, who was still lying on the floor, clutching his wounded shoulder, a twisted smile on his lips. "You were too late," the dictator rasped. "It's over." Hendricks stared down at him for a long moment, his mind racing. 2 minutes, that wasn't enough time to stop the failsafe, but there had to be another way. There was always another way. "Get to the ship," he said quietly. Alara blinked in confusion. "Get to the ship," he repeated, his voice firmer this time. "I am staying." Alara's eyes widened in shock. "No, Jack, you can." "There's no other way," he said, cutting her off. "If I stay, I can manually override the core and trigger a shutdown, but someone has to stay behind to do it." "No," she said again, her voice breaking. "We can find another way." "We don't have time," he said gently. "You know that. Now go." Riley stepped forward, his face pale. "Jack." "Go," Hendricks said more forcefully this time. "That says an order." Alara's expression crumpled, but she nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "You better be right behind us." He gave her a small, sad smile. "I'll do my best." Without another word, Alara, Riley, and Dr. Grace turned and ran, disappearing down the corridor toward the ship. Hendricks watched them go, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. He turned back to the console, his hands shaking as he began the override process. The timer was ticking down rapidly, each second, bringing them closer to destruction. Behind him, Kyrell chuckled weakly. "You really think you were going to pull this off? You read a fool, Jack." Hendricks didn't respond. He focused on the console, his fingers flying across the controls as the final seconds ticked away. And then with a sharp beat, the core began to shut down. Hendricks let out a long, shaky breath, relief flooding through him. He had done it. The Omega cannon was disarmed. The galaxy was safe. But he wasn't. The core's energy was destabilizing, and there was no way to stop the chain reaction. He could feel the heat building around him, the ground shaking as the core prepared to implode. Kyrell's laughter echoed in the chamber as the dictator realized what was happening. "You will die with me, Jack? How poetic." Hendricks stared at the console, his mind strangely calm. He had made his choice. He'd saved the galaxy, even if it meant sacrificing himself to do it. As the walls began to collapse around him, Hendricks closed his eyes and thought of the people he had sworn to protect. He had done his duty, just as he always had. And then, with a blinding flash of light, everything went silent. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The crowd gathered in the vast central square of New Arcadia, the capital of the United Earth Federation, where flags waved in a soft breeze under the clear sky. The new president stood on a raised platform, his voice booming across the city, addressing the eager citizen. "It is time to focus on home," President Jacob Thorpe announced, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "We have spent far too many resources on the distant stars, neglecting our planet, our people, and our future. The frontier colonies, they are a relic of an aggressive past today. We turn our focus inward, to rebuild, to thrive." John Archer watched from the crowd, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes, weathered by years of conflict and leadership, narrowed as the speech continued. Thorpe's words were a political victory, but they were also a death sentence for millions. The outer colonies, planets on the edge of human space, were not just far-flung outposts. They were humanity's shield against the unknown. Abandoning them meant leaving the door wide open for the alien menace lurking just beyond. Dismissed as a relic, Archer muttered under his breath, bitterness curling at the edges of his words. He had once stood where Thorpe did, delivering his own impassioned speeches, rallying people to defend humanity, chesh, order. Now he was nothing but a relic of an era people wanted to forget. The crowd erupted into applause as Thorpe finished his speech, and Archer turned away, his mind already racing. His duty didn't he end just because his title did. He had seen the alien threat firsthand. The Extranok were not a species that negotiated or respected boundaries. They expanded, consumed, and destroyed what the colonies left defenseless. It wouldn't be long before they advanced. That night, Archer sat in his modest apartment, poring over old military reports and recent intelligence. The Extranok's movements were subtle but undeniable. They were probing the frontier, testing humanity, strength or its weakness, as it seemed. Every instinct screamed at him that this was only the beginning. He needed to act. He couldn't rely on Thorpe's administration to save the colonies, not when they were content to abandon them. Archer leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his decision settling in. He would have to defy the very government he had once sworn to protect. There would be no military backup, no official support. It would just be him and a few loyal allies, a suicide mission perhaps, but a necessary one. Captain Mira Holt was in the middle of a training session when she received Archer's call. She had served under him for years, back when he was president, and trusted him more than anyone else in the Federation. When she saw his name flash on her communicator, she knew something was wrong. Captain Holt. Archer's voice came through steady but urgent. Fake, I need your help. It's about the colony. Holt wiped sweat from her brow, motioning for her trainees to continue without her. She stepped away, finding a quiet corner. What's that going on, sir? Thorpe is abandoning them. The Archer said bluntly, I am putting together a team we're going to Zeta-9. Zeta-9, Holt says, brow furrowed. A said colony says on the edge of the frontier, the has been hit hard by the Extranok. Exactly. It's the last line of defense, and it's going to fall if we don't act. Holt paused, considering the gravity of what he was asking. Tari, what's the plan? We go in, fortify the colony, and hold off the Extranok until the Federation wakes up and realizes the threat. I can't promise it. Will work. But it's better than sitting back and watching them wipe us out. There was a moment of silence before Holt spoke again, her voice firm. Hi, I am it. Good. Archer replied, relief in his voice. Then I'll send you the details. We leave in 2 days. Holt ended the call and stared at the horizon. 2 days to prepare for a mission that could change the fate of humanity. 2 days later, Archer stood on the bridge of the Resolute, a stolen military vessel equipped with just enough firepower to hold its own against a small Extranok fleet. It wasn't too much, but it would have to do. Beside him, Captain Holt was already in battle mode, coordinating with the crew they had hastily assembled, some former soldiers, others volunteers from the colonies. They all knew the risks. None of them hesitated. We're reapproaching Zeta-9. Asked the pilot, called out. Archer stepped forward, gazing out at the view screen. Zeta-9 came into view, its once thriving colony, now a shadow of its former self. The planet's surface was scarred by alien attacks. The colony's defenses barely functional. Let's make contact. Darsa, Archer order. The Resolute descended into the planet's atmosphere, dodging debris from recent battle. As they neared the colony's central command, they were hailed by a weary voice. This is Governor Keller of Zeta-9. Who are you, and what the hell are you doing here? This is John Archer, he replied. Holt, former president of the United Earth Federation. We were here to help. There was a pause before Keller's voice came back, tinged with disbelief. T-Ryan Archer, I thought you were retired. Not yet, Archer said. Not until we finish this fight. The Resolute landed in the colony's main docking bay, and Archer, Holt, and a small team disembarked. They were greeted by Governor Keller, a tired-looking man whose eyes betrayed the desperation of his situation. "We weren't expecting reinforcements," Hira Keller admitted, shaking Archer. "Second, frankly, we thought Earth had abandoned us." "They have," Archer replied bluntly. "Do I? But, let's..." Keller's expression darkened. "The externauts have been relentless. We've lost most of our defenses and the people are losing hope. If you reach here to save us, you are going to need more than just a small crew." "We were not here to save you," Archer said. "We were here to help you save yourself. We need to fortify this colony, rally the people, and prepare for a full-scale invasion. The externaut won't stop until they've taken this planet, and after that, it's only a matter of time before they reach Earth." Keller sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll do what we can, but it's going to be a hell of a fight." Archer nodded. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Captain Holt took charge of organizing the colony, the remaining military forces, training the ragtag group of soldiers and volunteers who had managed to survive the externuclear attack. Dr. Elias Taran, their scientist, worked day and night to restore and upgrade the colony's defenses using whatever scraps of technology he could find. The colonists were skeptical at first. They had been left to fend for themselves for so long that the idea of help, especially from a former president, seemed like a cruel joke. But as Archer moved among them, speaking to them, sharing their struggles, they began to believe. His determination was infectious, and slowly hope began to return to Zete-Denai. "They've seen too much," Holt remarked one evening as she and Archer watched the colonists working on repairs. "It's gonna take more than words to convince them. We can win them." "I know," Archer replied. "But if we can just hold them off long enough, maybe Earth will listen." Holt glanced at him. "Then we die here," Archer said simply. "But we all die fighting." The night before the Ixirnoxi first major assault, Archer stood alone on the colony's outer wall, staring out at the distant star. Somewhere out there, the Externox fleet was gathering, preparing to strike. He knew they wouldn't hold back this time. He was joined by Dr. Turan, who handed him a data pad. Sarikdava managed to upgrade the energy shields, but they won't last long against a sustained attack. "Were we looking at a few hours, maybe less?" "That's better than nothing," Archer said, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "There is something else," Turan continued, his voice lowered. "I've been going through old Federation files. There's a reason the Externok are so focused on these outer colonies. They were not just expanding, they were searching for something." Archer frowned, turning to face him. What do you mean?" Taran hesitated. "During your presidency, there were classified reports about an ancient alien technology hidden somewhere in the frontier colony. If the Externok get their hands on it, they could use it to gain complete control over the galaxy." Archer's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like a blow to the strength we need to find it before they do. "I've already started searching the colony's archives," Taran said. "Dari, but it's starting to take time. Time is something we don't have." The first attack came just before dawn. Alarms blared across the colony, rousing everyone from a fitful sleep. Archer was already on his feet, his eyes scanning the sky as streaks of fiery red descended through the atmosphere, the Externok ship. He grabbed his communicator, his voice calm but urgent. "Stray Holt, they're here, get everyone to their position." He raced toward the command center, where Governor Keller and Captain Holt were already coordinating the defense. The tension in the air was palpable, but the team moved with purpose. They had been preparing for this moment, and now it was time to see if their efforts would hold. "The shields are up," Taran reported from his station, "but I don't know how long they'll last under a full assault." "Make it last as long as you can." The alien vessels were sleek and menacing, their dark metal surfaces gleaming in the early light. They hovered for a moment, as if assessing the colony's defenses, then unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. The energy shields flared to life, absorbing the first wave of attack. Archer could feel the ground tremble beneath him as the blasts hit, the force of the impact rattling the very walls of the command center. Status bar. "Shields are holding for now," Holt responded, her hands flying over the controls. But they won. Be able to take much more of this. "Get the artillery online," Archer ordered. "We need to hit them back. Hard. Outside the colony, as defenses sprang to life, turrets hastily repaired and upgraded by Dr. Terran opened fire, sending streams of laser and missile fire toward the Exarnoke fleet. The aliens responded in kind, and soon the sky was alight with a deadly exchange of fire. Through the chaos, Archer remained calm, directing the defense with precision. Focus fire on their command ships, he instructed. Out, if we can take out their leadership, we might have a chance. Holt relayed the orders, and the colony's SOMS forces shifted their focus, targeting the largest exonaut vessel. But the aliens were relentless, their superior technology beginning to wear down the colony's defenses. One by one, the outer turrets were destroyed, leaving gaping holes in their protective line. "We've got a breach on the western perimeter," Harry's voice crackled over the commissary and their relanding troops. Archer clenched his fists, his mind racing. "Kayamira, take a team and hold that line. I'll cover the east." Holt gave him a sharp nod, already moving toward the exit. "Stay alive, John. We still need you." "You too," Archer called after her, before grabbing his rifle and heading toward the eastern barricade. The exonaut ground forces were fierce, armored creatures with segmented limbs and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. They moved with terrifying speed, crashing through the colony's defenses with little resistance. Archer took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had fought these things before. He knew how they operated. He took aim and fired his plasma rifle, sending a bolt of energy into the lead Exonaut soldier, dropping it instantly. The others paused, but only for a moment, before charging forward with renewed fury. The battle raged for what felt like hours, Archer, and the defenders held their ground as best they could, but the Exonaut kept coming, wave after wave of soldiers and artillery. Every time they thought they'd push them back, more appeared on the horizon. The colony's defenses were stretched to their breaking point. "But you're losing ground," Terraton's voice crackled over Archer's comms. "I don't know how much longer we can hold them." Archer fired another round into the approaching Exonaut, his mind racing for a solution. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time, but giving up wasn't an option. "We need to hold until Captain Holt's team can regroup. Keep them distracted for as long as possible." He sprinted to a nearby barricade, where a group of colonists were struggling to hold back the advancing Exonaut troop. "Fall back to the central plaza," he shouted. The colonists obeyed, retreating toward the heart of the colony as Archer and a few soldiers provided cover fire. The Exonauts, sensing victory, pressed their advantage, their troops swarming over the wreckage of the colony, sound outer defenses. In the command center, Dr. Terran was frantically working on his console, trying to boost the shields one last time. "If I can just reroute the power from the auxiliary system silos," he muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Suddenly, a burst of static erupted from the comms, followed by Captain Holt's fell voice. "John, we've got a problem. They were bringing in more ships, heavy carriers. We won. He survived another wave like that." Archer's heart sank. The Exonaut had committed everything to this assault. They were overwhelming the colony's defenses, and there was little left to fight back with. "How long until they land?" "Minutes," the Holt replied grimly. "We're running out of time." Archer's mind raced. They couldn't stop the invasion. Not like that. But maybe they didn't need to. Terran glanced up from his console. "We've then got a few left, but they won be enough to stop an entire fleet." "They don't need to be," Archer said, his eyes hardening with determination. "Surely we're going to blow the colony's main reactor." Terran stared at him in shock. "That will destroy the entire colony. We'll all be killed." "Is it the only way?" Archer insisted. "If we can, stop them here. We'll take them down to us. We'll make sure they don't get what they came for." Holtz's voice crackled over the comm, "Sir John, are you sure about this? There's no coming back from that." Archer nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'm sure. Get your team out of here, Mira. Get as many people to the evacuation shuttles as you can. I'll stay behind and make sure the reactor blows." There was a long pause before Holt replied, her voice tight with emotion. Harry understood. "Good luck, John. It's been an honor." Archer closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself for what was to come. Then he turned to Terran. "Get to the shuttles. Make sure the colonists get out of here." Terran hesitated, his face pale. "What about you?" "I'll handle the rest," Archer said quietly. "There we go." The scientist swallowed hard, then gave a curt nod before running toward the evacuation zone. Alone now, Archer made his way to the colony's central reactor, his heart pounding in his chest. The sounds of battle raged all around him, but he pushed forward, determined to see this through. He knew the odds were against them from the start. But he wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity. Reaching the reactor, Archer quickly set the plasma charges, his hand steady despite the chaos surrounding him. He had one chance to get this right, one chance to make sure the astronaut paid for every inch of ground they had taken. As he finished setting the last charge, the door to the reactor room slid open and a familiar figure stepped inside, Lieutenant Jonas, his face twisted with guilt and desperation. Archer Jonas gasped, his weapon raised but shaking There's still time to negotiate with them. We don't have to die here. Archer's eyes hardened as he stared at the younger man. You betrayed us, Jonas. You've been working with the astronaut this whole time, haven't you? Jonas' hand trembled on his weapon. I didn't betray anyone. I was trying to save lives. You don't understand they were going to wipe us out if we keep fighting. Archer shook his head, stepping toward the traitor. The only way we survive is by standing our ground. Surrendering to them would doom us all. Jonas' face twisted in anguish. I didn't want it to come to this. Before he could react, Archer moved with lightning speed, disarming Jonas and throwing him to the ground. He stood over him, eyes cold. Get out of here. If you ever come near my people again, I won. To show mercy. Jonas scrambled to his feet, fear and shame in his eyes. He fled without another word, disappearing into the smoke-filled corridors of the colony. Archer turned back to the reactor, the final countdown already ticking down on the screen. He activated the charges and began his final walk toward the surface. The colony was crumbling around him, the Cernak forces tearing through the last of the defenses, but he moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on the sky. He emerged into the central plaza, where the last of the evacuation shuttles were lifting off. Captain Holt stood near the ramp of the final shuttle, her eyes searching the horizon. When she saw Archer approaching, her face lit up with relief, but that relief quickly turned to horror when she realized what he had done. John, no, she whispered, stepping toward him. It's out of the only way, Archer said, softly, his eyes locking with hers. Holt's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, knowing there was no time for argument. Thank you, Felicity whispered, her voice breaking. Tear for everything. Archer gave her a small smile. It's been an honor. The shuttle doors closed, and Archer watched as it lifted off into the sky, disappearing into the cloud. He stood alone in the plaza, now the sounds of battle fading as the astronaut drew closer. The reactor timer ticked down and Archer closed his eyes, taking one last deep breath. The explosion was deafening, a brilliant flash of light that engulfed the entire colony in a fiery blaze. The astronaut ships in the sky were obliterated, their forces on the ground consumed in the blast, and with them, John Archer humanity, Saul's last line of defense, was gone. But his legacy would live on. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The rain outside Jack Reynolds' modest post-presidential home beat against the window like a relentless drum. The once bustling house had become eerily quiet since his election defeat. No more aides, no more reporters, just the silence that echoed through the halls, punctuated by the occasional chirp of his phone or the click of his computer mouse. Defeat had been bitter, and while Jack understood the public's desire for change, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been deeply wrong about the entire election. The results had felt off, and yet there was no proof. Tonight was one of those quiet nights, the kind that stretched on endlessly, offering no respite from his thoughts. Jack sat at his desk, staring at the glow of his computer screen, pretending to focus on mundane tasks. Old campaign reports, speeches he never got to deliver. It was all he had to hold on to from his time in power. The world outside moved on without him, leaving him behind to wallow in his thoughts. Then, without warning, the screen flickered, the room, soft lighting dimmed as a strange buzzing filled the air. Jack leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the computer as static overtook the screen. For a moment, he thought the power might have gone out, but everything else in the room remained stable. A message appeared, a distorted voice crackled through the speakers, faint but unmistakably there. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he adjusted his chair, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Mr. President, the voice rasped, you have little time. Jack blinked in confusion. The words were garbled, broken by interference, but the message was clear enough. He hadn't been called Mr. President by anyone outside of formalities since the loss. Was this a prank? There is war extinction, The voice stuttered, sounding as though it was being transmitted from a great distance. Jack leaned in closer, his breath catching. This wasn't some random hack or phone call. It was too deliberate, too specific. What the hell is this? Jack muttered, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the door with a camera, shouting, "They gotcha." Dairy, but no one came. The rain outside beat steadily on, the house as quiet as ever. Must stop at Antarctica war humans. The voice crackled again, and then it was gone. The screen flickered, returning to the idle home screen Jack had been staring at just minutes ago. He sat there frozen, his mind racing. Antarctica, war humans. The words rang in his ears. This couldn't be real. His rational mind told him it was some elaborate hoax, but deep down something else stirred. A sense of dread and urgency, like the world had tilted off its axis, and he was the only one who could feel it. He ran a hand through his silvering hair, then typed quickly into the search bar, looking for any recent events in Antarctica. It was a shot in the dark, but if the message was even remotely credible, there had to be something. After a few minutes of scrolling through news reports, Jack's eyes landed on an article buried deep in the search result. "Unexplained seismic activity in Antarctica raises concerns," the headline read. His brow furrowed as he clicked on it. The article was short, barely more than a paragraph, but it detailed a series of recent tremors in a remote part of the continent, far from any known fault line. Scientists were baffled, speculating everything from geothermal shifts to underground volcanic activity, but no one had an answer. Jack sat back, staring at the screen. His instincts screamed that this was more than a coincidence. He had spent decades in politics, and he knew when something was being deliberately hidden. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain of what to do next. The warning had been brief, but it had been clear. A war capable of ending humanity was coming, and it was somehow linked to Antarctica. He couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this than just natural phenomena. His election loss had never sat right with him, and now, as absurd as it seemed, he wondered if it had all been orchestrated to keep him out of the way during a critical moment. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Jack looked up as his assistant, Tim, poked his head into the room. "Everything okay, Mr. Reynolds?" Tim asked, his voice filled with the cautious respect of someone who wasn't sure if their presence was welcome. Jack cleared his throat, trying to shake off the strange sense of foreboding that had settled over him.
"Yeah.
Just going over some old note." Tim nodded, glancing at the screen, but clearly not seeing anything out of the ordinary. "Well, if you need anything, I'll be in the other room. I'll lock up on my way out." Jack waved him off and watched as Tim disappeared into the hallway, leaving him alone with his thoughts once more. He stared at the computer, then at the small slip of paper on his desk where he scribbled the words Antarctica and war in his barely legible handwriting. He wasn't sure what to do with this information yet, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. His fingers tapped the desk nervously as he considered his option. He had no official power anymore, no influence over the military or intelligence agency, but he still had contacts, people who owed him favors, people who would listen. And if what the voice had said was true, then the stakes were too high to remain idle. Without another word, Jack stood and grabbed his coat, determination settling over him like a cloak. He wasn't going to let this go, not until he knew the truth. The drive to the old government facility in the outskirts of Senate was a quiet one, the rain never letting up as Jack sped through the nearly deserted street. He had made some calls, quiet, subtle inquiries to old colleagues in the intelligence community. The signal, whatever it was, needed to be verified, and he needed answers. But none of the official channels were willing to give him anything. Most thought he was grasping at straws, a former president desperate to remain relevant. But there had been one lead, a former defense contractor who had worked on classified operations during Jack's presidency. His name was Dr. Emily Carter, a scientist who had been involved in some of the government, a more secretive research program. Jack hadn't spoken to her in years, but her name had come up in connection with an obscure project that involved predictive algorithms and time manipulation. It sounded like something out of science fiction, but after the message he'd received, nothing seemed impossible anymore. As Jack pulled into the Facility C parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The place was practically abandoned, its windows dark and its gates locked, but his contact had assured him that Carter was still there, working on something. He stepped out of the car, pulling his coat tight against the rain as he approached the entrance. The security pad was still operational, though it took a few tries before it accepted the access code he'd been given. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and Jack stepped inside. The facility was cold, sterile, and eerily quiet. He made his way through the dimly lit halls, his footsteps echoing off the tile floor. There were no signs of life, no guards, no staff, just the hum of machinery in the distance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the research wing. A single light flickered at the end of the hall, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. Jack hesitated for a moment before stepping into the room. At the far end of the lab, standing over a desk cluttered with papers and monitors, was a woman in her early 40s, her auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She didn't look up as he entered, but Jack knew it was her Emily Carter. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said, her voice calm but laced with tension. She finally turned to face him, her eyes scanning him up and down, as if she were assessing whether he was still the man she remembered. "I didn't expect a welcome committee," Jack replied, trying to keep his tone light. But there was no mistaking the urgency in his voice. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I got a message, a signal from the future." Emily raised an eyebrow, then sighed, turning back to her monitors. "You are not the only one." Jack stared at Emily, unsure if he heard her correctly. "Harriet, what do you mean I am not the only one?" Emily sighed and pushed a few papers aside, revealing a sleek, high-tech device that hummed faintly on the desk. "You received a signal? So did I. And so did several others. Scientists, intelligence officers, people with influence. We've all been getting these messages, but they were not all the same. Some of us got warnings of war, others they've been shown something even worse." Jack felt a chill run down his spine, worse than a war that could wipe out humanity. Emily gave a short, humorless laugh. "Paris, yes, worse. The war is just the beginning. If we can, stop it. Something much darker is coming after it." "The signals are from the future, Jack. They were not a joke. They were fragments from a timeline we were erasing to prevent, sent back to give us a chance to change things." Jack rubbed his forehead, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Shriek, cry, whine. Now, why did this start after the election? "Because the timeline changed when you lost," Emily said bluntly. "In the original timeline, you were supposed to win. Your policies, your approach, they would have delayed the conflict, maybe even stopped it. But when you lost, the chain of events shifted now. Whoever's side in the war is moving faster, and we were running out of time." Jack paced the small space of the lab, his mind racing. "And you reassure it's coming from the future? This isn't experimental tech being used against us?" Emily leaned back in her chair, watching him carefully. "Caroline, sure. The tech we developed was meant to anticipate future outcomes, but it's evolved far beyond that. Somewhere along the line, the predictive algorithm started to receive data from the future. But not just any future, our future. The war you heard about, it's inevitable, unless we stop it now." "How?" Jack asked, his voice tight. "How do we stop a war that hasn't happened yet?" Emily paused, studying him for a moment before speaking. "Sarah, there's a location, a research facility hidden in Antarctica. It's center where the final pieces of this puzzle are being kept. The technology that could either prevent or accelerate this war is there. But it's guarded, and you can just walk in and ask for it." "Who's guarding it?" Jack asked. He already had an idea. If the conspiracy ran as deep as Emily was suggesting, there were likely layers of protection around whatever lay in that facility. Private contractors, some loyal to the new administration, some to corporations that stand to gain from the conflict. They didn't know exactly what they were protecting, but they know it's important. If we want to stop the war, we need to get inside that facility and take control of the tech before it falls into the wrong hands. Jack clenched his fists. "Why didn't you tell anyone about this earlier? Why keep it a secret?" Emily narrowed her eyes. Who exactly was I supposed to tell? The same people who stand to profit from chaos. The same people who orchestrated your loss because they knew you wouldn't play along with their plans. This isn't about national security anymore. Jack had said about survival humanity. Survival. Jack stopped pacing, the weight of her words settling over him like a suffocating blanket. He had spent his entire life fighting for what he believed was right, serving his country, protecting its interests. But now the battlefield was different. He wasn't fighting for a nation. He was fighting for the future itself. He met Emily's sim gaze. "What do we do next?" Emily stood, grabbing a black case from under the desk and placing it in front of him. She opened it, revealing a series of encrypted files and several small, sleek devices. We go to Antarctica, she said simply, pathly. But we won, TB alone. The people who sent us the signals, the ones still out there, they'll help us. We need to assemble a team, Jack. And we need to move fast. Jack looked down at the case, then back at Emily Howler. And if we fail, Tiel. Her expression darkened. If we fail, the war happens, and everything after it. Well, we won. Take me around to see it. They both stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling between them like a storm waiting to break. Jack knew what was at stake now, and for the first time since losing the election, he felt a sense of purpose again. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been, but he wasn't the type to back down from a fight. The flight to Antarctica was long and silent, the hum of the jet engines the only sound as Jack and Emily reviewed their plan. The team had come together faster than Jack had expected. Former military personnel, intelligence agents, even a few rogue scientists who had worked on classified projects. They all had one thing in common. They had received the same signals, and they were all determined to stop the future war. As the jet descended over the icy continent, Jack stared out the window at the vast frozen landscape below. The facility they were targeting was hidden beneath the ice, its existence known only to a select few. Getting in wouldn't be easy, but they had a plan. The team landed at a remote airstrip far from any known research station. From there, they would travel by snow vehicles, navigating the treacherous terrain until they reached the facility. Time was running out. According to the latest signal, the war would begin within months if they didn't intervene. The cold bit into Jack's skin as he stepped out of the jet, the wind howling around him. Emily was already coordinating with the rest of the team, their movements precise and rehearsed. They had trained for this, every detail planned out. Now it was a matter of execution. Hours passed as they made their way across the frozen wasteland, the facility looming in the distance like a fortress of steel and ice. Jack's breath fogged in the freezing air as he adjusted his goggles, keeping his eyes trained on the structure ahead. They were close now, closer than they had ever been. But as they approached, something felt off. The facility cell's defenses were supposed to be state-of-the-art, impenetrable. Yet there were no signs of activity, no guards, no patrols. The place was eerily silent. Emily's voice crackled over the comms. Something is wrong. There should be more security here. Jack nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. Nah, stay alert. This could be a trap. They moved in cautiously, their steps silent as they approached the facility. The door was sealed, but Emily quickly hacked the control panel and it slid open with a hiss. Inside, the facility was just as cold and sterile as Jack had imagined, metal walls, harsh lighting, and the constant hum of machinery. The team split up, moving through the corridors with military precision. Jack and Emily headed straight for the control room where the data they needed was stored. If they could get their hands on it, they could stop the war before it even began. But as they reached the control room, they found it already occupied. A man stood in the center of the room, his back to them, as he studied the monitor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in the same high-tech gear as the guards they had expected to encounter. Jack raised his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. Jack barked. The man turned slowly, his face partially obscured by a visor, but Jack recognized him immediately. General Harris, Jack said, lowering his weapon in shock. Errol, what the hell are you doing here? Harris had been one of Jack's most trusted military advisors during his presidency, a man who had always advocated for strength and preparedness. But now seeing him here in the heart of the facility they were trying to infiltrate, Jack felt a wave of betrayal wash over him. I could ask you the same thing, Mr. President. Here Harris replied, his voice cold and measured. First, you were never supposed to find this place. Jack took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. What's going on here? Harris, why are you involved in this? Harris sighed, removing his visor and revealing a face lined with years of experience and hardened by countless battles. I've been part of this project since the beginning. The signals, the technology. It was all part of a plan to protect humanity. But you were never meant to know. Emily stepped forward, her voice sharp. Protect humanity? By starting a war that will wipe us all out. Harris shook his head. You don't understand. The war is necessary. It's now the only way to ensure our survival. The world is on the brink of collapse, overpopulation, dwindling resources. This war will reset the balance, and when it's sent over, humanity will emerge stronger. Jack felt his blood run cold. You were talking about sacrificing billions of lives. Harris met his gaze unflinching. Hike for the greater good. How? Jack Shay's hand tightened around his weapon. Try can't he let that happen? Harris smiled faintly, his eyes hard. You want to have a choice. It's already begun. Before Jack could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. The screens around them lit up with warning messages, and a countdown timer appeared at the center of the main monitor. The war had already started. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to Emily. Fire, we need to stop this now. Emily was already at the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to override the system. But it was too late. The facility had been set to trigger the war, and there was nothing they could do to stop it from here. Harris watched them with a calm, detached expression. Harry, you can stop the future, Jack, it's already written. But Jack wasn't willing to accept that. Not yet. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft, golden hue over the coastal town where Michael Carter had made his home. The waves lapped lazily against the shore, the rhythm of the ocean, a far cry from the hectic pace of his previous life. It had been 3 years since he left the presidency, 3 years since the constant barrage of decisions, crises, and political maneuvering. Now he tended to his garden, fixed up the old house, and spent long hours sitting on the porch watching the ocean stretch endlessly before him. He wasn't exactly lonely. He had a few close friends who would visit, and his former chief of staff, Rachel Adams, still called occasionally, but the days were quiet, and that was how he liked it. Or so he told himself. Deep down, there was a gnawing sense of purposelessness that he had never managed to shake. The world still turned without him. That peace was shattered one late afternoon when his phone rang. The number was familiar, one he hadn't seen in years but could never forget. Rachel. Michael, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice urgent, cutting through the static of a poor connection. There's a situation, an emergency. Michael stood up from his porch chair, his heart already picking up speed. What kind of emergency? Rachel took a deep breath. It's a deep space vessel, the Odyssey. It's carrying 1 million settlers toward the outer colonies. It's gone off course. He felt his stomach drop. He knew the name the Odyssey. Everyone did. It was the largest civilian transport ever built, a symbol of humanity, SAS future, a beacon of hope. How bad is it? It was heading toward a black hole. There was a long pause as the weight of the situation hit him, and they've tried. Everything, Rachel interrupted. The ship systems are failing. The current administration, they reign chaos. But I remembered your connections, your team. We need you. Michael ran a hand through his graying hair, pacing her across the wooden planks of his port. He hadn't been part of that world for years, and now he was being asked to return. But 1 million lives. Could he really stand by and do nothing? I am not in charge anymore, Rachel. I know, she said, her voice softening, but you were still the best chance those people had. For a moment, Michael stood there, staring out at the horizon where the sky met the sea in an unbroken line. Then he made his decision. All right, he said, his voice firm. I'll get the team together. Getting the old team back together wasn't as simple as making a few phone calls. People had moved on, some had retired, others had taken on new lives. But the urgency of the situation gave his words weight, and one by one they agreed to meet him. The first call was to Commander Sarah Mitchell. She had been the backbone of their military strategy during his presidency, leading space missions with an unflinching determination that had earned her the respect of every soldier under her command. After leaving the military, Sarah had retreated to a secluded life on the outer colonies where she worked as a freelance security consultant. Sarah's voice was clipped when she answered. I thought I was done with space disaster. Michael chuckled, though there was no humor in it. So did I, but this one says different. It's the Odyssey. There was a long pause. Next, he contacted Dr. Calvin Wright, a brilliant astrophysicist who had worked with the administration on space exploration initiative. Calvin had always been the skeptic in the group, the one who weighed every decision against the impossible odds. Michael wasn't sure if Calvin would even take his call, but when he explained the situation, Calvin's response was immediate. Black holes are unforgiving, Calvin said, his voice grim, but if anyone can pull this off, it's Sasha. The last call was to Aiden Rivers, a tech genius and hacker who had served as head of technological security during Michael Suss's presidency. Aiden had always been the wild card, brilliant but unpredictable. He now worked for a private AI development firm, far removed from the political arena. I was hoping for something a little more mundane, like stopping a rogue AI, Aiden said with a wry chuckle, but sure, why not? Count me in. Within hours, the team was assembled and heading toward the launch site. Michaelson's mind was already spinning with the logistics, the risks, the million things that could go wrong. But as he stood there watching the Valkyrie, their sleek, advanced rescue vessel, prepare for takeoff, he knew they had no other choice. As the Valkyrie tore through space at blistering speeds, the team gathered in the command center, a low hum of machinery surrounding them. Michael stood at the helm, a holographic display of the Odyssey and the black hole looming on the central screen. The visual representation was terrifying. The massive transport ship was being inexorably drawn toward the event horizon, the point of no return. Sarah leaned against the console, her eyes scanning the data feed. "We vang at about 20 hours before the Odyssey is too close to the black hole to escape," she said. "If we don't, he'd get them out by then." Michael didn't need her to finish the sentence. They all knew the state. Calvin's thin brow was furrowed as he studied the gravitational reading. The black hole is distorting space-time in ways we haven't seen before. We'll have to get dangerously close just to reach them. "And then what?" Aiden said, his fingers flying across the control panel as he hacked into the Odyssey's malfunctioning system. "We get on board, and what? Their AI has fried the navigation systems offline and half the ship's sense engines are damaged." "That's why we're here," Michael said. "We'll fix what we can, stabilize what we can, and get them out of there." Sarah gave him a look, one that said she wasn't too convinced, but she didn't argue. "We'll need a backup plan in case we can get their engines working. There's a star near the black hole, Cess orbit," Calvin said, tapping the holographic display to zoom in on the star system. "If we can use its gravity to slingshot the Odyssey around it, we might be able to pull them out of the black hole. It's gravitational well." "That's a big if," Aiden muttered, "and it still doesn't solve the issue of the AI. Without it, there's no way the settlers will be able to steer that ship." Michael's mind raced. Time was running out, and they had far more questions than answer. But they had to keep moving forward. A million lives depended on it. "Let's get closer," he said. "We'll figure it out once we re-on board." As the Valkyrie approached the Odyssey, the black hole's gravitational pull became palpable, a constant force tugging at the edges of their reality. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, and Michael felt a surge of unease. It was as if the black hole was alive, hungry, waiting for them to make one wrong move. "We reclose," Sarah said, her hands steady on the controls. "I am bringing us in." The massive silhouette of the Odyssey filled their view. The once majestic ship was now a ghostly hulk, its lights flickering erratically and its hull pocked with damage. Michael could see movement through the viewports, panicked settlers, rushing through the corridors, trying to escape a fate they couldn't try and outrun. "We and Sarah announced as the Valkyrie docked with the larger ship. Prepare for boarding." Michael grabbed his gear, his heart pounding as the docking doors hissed open. He stepped onto the Odyssey's Cirrus deck, the air thick with the smell of burnt wiring and fear. The sounds of chaos surrounded them, people shouting alarms, blaring, and the steady hum of the black hole sent distant pull. "Let's move," he ordered, leading the team deeper into the ship. The hallway was dimly lit with emergency lights flickering as Michael and his team made their way through the chaos. The ship trembled underfoot, a constant reminder of how little time they had before the Odyssey would be pulled into the black hole. The settlers, confused and scared, rushed past them, their faces pale with panic, their voices a rising cacophony of desperation. "Keep moving," Michael said, his voice firm but calm. "You need to get to the bridge." Aiden was already working on his tablet, syncing with the Odyssey's failing systems as they advanced. "I am not getting much cooperation from the ship's AI. It's barely functional, and the closer we get to the black hole, the more unstable it's becoming. Can you reboot it?" Michael asked, leading the way through a narrow passageway where a bulkhead had partially collapsed. "I'll need to access the core AI terminal," Sarah Aiden replied, eerie, which, judging by these readings, is on the lower deck. "If I can get there and bypass the damage, I should be able to restore partial control." Running out of time, Sarah said, her jaw clenched as she scanned the situation. The Earth place is falling apart. Michael pushed forward, his mind racing through the option. Hayden, get to the AI terminal. Do whatever it takes to get that system back online. Sarah, you're with me. Let's get to the bridge and see what we can do from there. Calvin, start running calculations for the slingshot maneuver. If Aiden can get the engines back up, we are going to need every possible advantage. Without hesitation, they split up. Aiden peeled off down a side corridor, his footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the maze of damaged passageways. Michael and Sarah pressed onward, the oppressive heat from the ship's failing systems making the air feel thick and heavy. They climbed a narrow stairwell, dodging debris and occasionally helping settlers who were trapped or injured. By the time they reached the bridge, the situation had deteriorated even further. The windows overlooking space were blackened and cracks webbed through the glass. A few officers were slumped at their stations, barely conscious, while others rushed to and fro, shouting into broken communication devices. Who's in command here? Michael demanded as he stepped onto the bridge. A frazzled-looking officer, her uniform torn and stained, looked up from her console. The captain, he didn't make it. We've been trying to stabilize the ship, but it's no use. We were losing power, and the AI is completely offline. That's being handled, Michael said, scanning the control panel. Focus on what you can do now. We were going to attempt a gravitational slingshot around a nearby star. It's risky, but it's our only shot. The officer blinked at him, clearly overwhelmed. Tie a slingshot, the only way, Calvin said, entering the bridge behind them. He moved quickly to the navigation console and began pulling up data. This star's gravity is strong enough to give us the push we need to escape the black hole, but it's going to be tight. We'll need precise timing and a lot of speed. Sarah took command of the situation, start prepping the engines, and get any remaining crew ready for manual overrides. Michael, what's our status with Aiden? Michael tapped into his communicator. Aiden, how's that looking? A burst of static was followed by Aiden, Seth's voice, strained but audible. I know at the core it's in a mess down here, but I think I can get it back online. Give me 5 minutes. Make it 3. Michael said, glancing at the clock ticking down on the display. We're running out of time. The minutes dragged by as they worked. Calvin input the necessary data into the navigation system, calculating every variable to ensure their slingshot would work. Sarah coordinated with the crew, preparing for the maneuvers they would need to execute manually if Aiden couldn't bring the AI fully online. Michael watched the black hole on the main display, its swirling darkness, a constant reminder of the unstoppable force they were fighting against. The gravitational pull was already starting to distort the ship trajectory, pulling it closer with each passing second. Suddenly, Aiden's voice crackled back to life. I've got it. The AI is back online, at least partially. I am feeding it the data now. Good work? Michael said, Calvin, how are we looking? We've got a shot, Calvin replied, but we need to act now any longer. And we want to be able to break free. Do it. The AI came to life with a series of hums and beeps, and the ship's systems began to stabilize. The lights flickered back on and the screens flashed with new data. The settlers were still in chaos, but at least now they were fighting chance. Engaging engines, Sarah said, her fingers flying over the control. The ship groaned as its engines roared to life, pushing the Odyssey toward the gravitational slingshot. Bureau, hold on to something. The force of the acceleration pressed them all into their seats as the ship hurtled forward. Michael gripped the edge of the console, his eyes locked on the display as they neared the critical point of the maneuver. The black hole loomed large in the background, its pull growing stronger by the second. Almost there, Calvin muttered, his hands steady as he adjusted the calculations in real time. To just a little more. The ship shook violently as it passed through the edge of the gravitational field, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed as if they were about to be pulled into the black hole. Then with a sudden jolt, the ship lurched forward, propelled by the star's gravity. We're clear, Sarah shouted over the roar of the engine. Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Sarah, Calvin, give me a status update. We out of the black hole, Senpo Trey, Calvin said, his voice filled with relief. But there was no time to celebrate. The ship was still damaged, and they were far from safe. Aiden's voice came over the comm again, tired. Engines are still critical. We were not out of the woods yet, but at least we fought ourselves some time. Michael nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. Good, now let's get these people home. As the ship stabilized, Michael and Sarah moved through the corridors, helping the remaining settlers and crew. They found survivors huddled in every corner, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The ship's medics were overwhelmed, but they worked tirelessly, tending to the injured and the sick. Hours passed, and slowly the panic subsided. The settlers began to realize that they were no longer spiraling towards certain death. Hope started to creep back into their eyes. Michael returned to the bridge where Calvin and Aiden were monitoring the ship systems. Tell you what's our next move? Claire, he asked. We got enough power to make it to the nearest space station, Calvin said, tapping the coordinates onto the display. It's still a few hours away, but they'll be able to handle the rest of the rescue effort. Michael nodded. Let's us get it done. The journey to the station was tense, but uneventful. The crew worked around the clock to keep the engines running and the ship stable. The settlers were still shaken, but the knowledge that they were safe for the time being kept them calm. As the Odyssey approached the space station, the docking procedures began. Michael stood by the viewport watching as the massive ship aligned itself with the station's sun landing bay. It had been a long, grueling mission, but they had done it. They had saved 1 million lives. Sarah walked up beside him, her face lined with exhaustion. "To a hell of a mission, huh?" Michael smiled faintly. "I'd say so. Couldn't have done it without all of you." "We couldn't have it without you either," Sarah said, her tone serious. "You brought us together and you made the tough calls. That's what leaders do." Michael nodded, but he didn't feel like celebrating. There was still so much to process, so much to reflect on. But for now, he could at least take comfort in the fact that they had succeeded. As the Odyssey docked and the settlers began to disembark, Michael watched in silence. The mission was over, but the weight of it still hung heavy on his shoulder. He had stepped back into a world he thought he had left behind, and now that it was over, he wasn't sure what came next. But for now, he was content to just breathe, to feel the relief of knowing that they had done something extraordinary. They had defied the odds and pulled off the impossible. And for that, he was grateful. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The defeat had come like a tidal wave, crashing over every certainty the president once held dear. Only 2 days ago, he stood before the citizens of the United States, delivering a concession speech that no amount of charisma could soften. The election had been brutal, a battle of ideals, vision, and power. Now it was over, and the title of President of the United States no longer belonged to him. He was just another man who had once worn the crown. As his motorcade drove him away from the Capitol, flanked by the security detail that seemed too large and unnecessary now, the president's mind spiraled. He was no longer the future, no longer the one to carry the torch for humanity. Someone else would lead. Someone who he believed in his heart would lead humanity astray. When they arrived at the secluded estate, the president was greeted by a handful of close advisors who had stood by him through the campaign. They had all seen the same dream of a better future for humanity. Now that dream was dead. Yet tonight they had something to show him, something that might change everything. A chance, they hinted, to reclaim control, but they spoke in half whispers in the language of conspiracy. In the heart of the estate's underground bunker, they revealed the device. It was a peculiar machine built by government scientists working in the shadows. According to them, it had the power to manipulate the flow of time itself. A time rift, they called it, a wormhole to the future, said Dr. Marcus, one of the chief engineers. The president looked at the device, a towering mass of cables, metal, and glowing blue energy, its existence barely making sense in the realm of what he knew to be possible. "We believe this can show us what's to come," Dr. Marcus explained. "We've been able to stabilize the rift, but we don't know exactly where it leads." The president felt a stir of hope, mingled with unease. Could this be it? Could he see the future and prevent his greatest fears from coming to pass? "I need to know," he whispered more to himself than to anyone in the room. And so they activated the machine. The air shimmered, the blue glow intensifying, and with a sharp crack of energy, reality itself seemed to bend. The president's body felt weightless for a brief moment before everything spun violently and darkness swallowed him whole. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the underground bunker anymore. He was lying on a cold metallic floor in an alien place that resembled nothing he knew. The sky above him was a strange color, a deep purplish black, littered with unfamiliar constellations. The air was thick and oppressive, and the structures around him were towering, twisted monoliths made of sleek metal and alien symbols. He struggled to his feet, disoriented, his head throbbing with the aftereffects of the rift. Where am I? He muttered, trying to gather his bearings. There was no response, only the eerie silence of a world that felt lifeless. But then in the distance, he heard it, a mechanical sound, sharp and rhythmic, like boots marching on metal. Before he could react, figures appeared, tall, humanoid shapes, encased in armor, their faces hidden beneath helmets, with glowing red visors. They weren't human, that much was clear. They moved with an eerie precision, and behind them, dragging their feet in chains, were people humans, enslaved. The president's heart raced. He backed into the shadows, watching as the alien soldiers marched past. The humans, ragged and gaunt, shuffled along with vacant eyes, their bodies broken by labor. What had happened to the world he knew? Once the group had passed, he emerged from his hiding place and followed, keeping his distance but close enough to observe. They led the humans into a massive structure, a fortress of metal and energy, spires piercing the dark sky like claws. The president moved stealthily, avoiding patrols until he reached what seemed to be a control room. There, standing over a massive holographic map of the planet, were the leaders of this new regime, aliens, tall and grotesque, their skin pale and translucent, their eyes cold and calculating. It's been over 3 centuries since the humans fell, one of them said, his voice a low growl. Our hold on this planet is absolute. The resistance is nothing but a nuisance. The president's blood turned to ice. 3 centuries. Had he truly traveled so far into the future? His mind raced. If humanity had fallen to these alien oppressors, then what had become of Earth? How had this future come to pass, and more importantly, could he stop it? Before he could contemplate his next move, the room filled with alarm. The aliens barked orders in their guttural language, and the president knew he had been spotted. He darted out of the control room, running through the narrow corridors of the fortress, his heart pounding in his chest. But escape was impossible. The fortress was a labyrinth, and soon he was cornered. The alien soldiers surrounded him, their weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, lifting its visor to reveal a twisted face with reptilian features. It spoke in a voice that sent chills down the president's spine. "You do not belong here," it hissed. "You are an anomaly, a ripple in time. You will be corrected." The president didn't have time to react before he felt a sharp pain in the back of his neck and everything went black again. When he awoke, he was in a dimly lit room, restrained to a chair by metal cuff. His body ached and his mind swirled with confusion. He was no longer in a fortress, but a small underground bunker. The walls were lined with old human technology, outdated computers, worn maps, and relics from a world long gone. A figure stood before him, a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp and filled with determination. She wore a patchwork uniform, clearly a makeshift piece from what little resources were left. "You reawake," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of impatience. "Good, we don't have much time." The president struggled against his restraints, but they held firm. "Where am I? Who are you?" The woman knelt in front of him, her gaze piercing. "I am Dr. Elena Valdez, leader of the human resistance. And you," she paused, studying him carefully. "You read the president aren't to you, the one from the past." His heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" "We've been waiting for you," she said simply, standing up and beginning to pace. "For years we've known about the time rift. We've been trying to use it to send one of our own back to warn humanity before the invasion, but the Exaringas control it too tightly. When you arrived, we knew the rift had finally brought someone important, someone who might change everything." "Exaros," the president head spun. "That's who they are." "The alien race that enslaved us," Dr. Valdez replied. "They invaded centuries ago when Earth was fractured and weak. Humanity never stood a chance. Now they use time itself as their weapon, ensuring we remain in control no matter what we do." The president's breath caught in his throat. It was worse than he could have imagined. The world he knew was gone and the future was a nightmare, but deep within him, something stirred. This was the fight of his life, the one he had been born to lead. "How do we stop them?" he asked, his voice low but filled with resolve. Dr. Valdez smiled grimly. "We take the fight to them. We destroy the time nexus, the central point from which the Express controlled time itself." If we destroy it, we might be able to rewrite history, prevent the invasion, save humanity. The president's heart pounded in his chest. This was his chance to make everything right, to save not just the future but the past as well. Then let's do it, he said, his voice firm. Let's take back our world. Dr. Valdez nodded and moved to release his restraints. There's no turning back from this, she warned. Once we start, the SpaceSci-Fi will stop at nothing to eliminate it. The president met her gaze, his determination unshakable. I've effaced word. As he stood up, feeling the weight of his purpose settling on his shoulders, he knew that the battle ahead would be unlike anything he had ever faced before, but he also knew one thing for certain. He was the president of humanity once more, and he would not fail this time. The president adjusted to the dim light of the bunker as his mind focused on the mission ahead. The weight of the future and the past bore down on him as he followed Dr. Valdez through a narrow corridor lined with remnants of old human technology. The hum of machinery filled the air, a faint reminder of the ingenuity that humanity once possessed, now reduced to fragments, scavenged from a forgotten world. Your arrival has caused a ripple in time, Dr. Valdez said, her voice cutting through the silence as they walked. The Acaroros will be looking for you. They were already hunting us, but now with you here, they'll escalate. The president, as fists clenched, he had faced political enemies, maneuvered through the twisted corridors of power, but this was something far greater. The stakes were no longer about winning an election or shaping policy. It was about survival, about reclaiming humanity's sound future from the clutches of an alien empire that had bent time to their will. They emerged into a larger room, where a small group of ragtag soldiers stood around a table. Maps, holographic projections, and old data disks cluttered the surface. These weren't trained soldiers trained in any formal sense. They were survivors, resistance fighters who had spent their lives under the iron heel of the SpaceSci-Fi, fighting a war that had long seemed hopeless. This is our team, Dr. Valdez said, introducing him to the group. We've also been planning an assault on the time nexus for years. Now with you here, we have the final piece. You know what, so let's state. The president studied their faces. Each one carried the scars of war, both physical and emotional. There was Jack, a wiry man with quick eyes and a faster trigger finger, who had lost his family to an ex-herd. Eva, a tall woman with short, cropped hair, her face etched with defiance, had been one of the first to join the resistance after her home city was leveled by the invader. And then there was Nate, a former scientist who had turned to guerrilla warfare after his research was co-opted by the enemy. They nodded at the president, acknowledging him not as a stranger, but as someone who had been destined to stand among them. There was no room for hesitation now. Dr. Valdez spread out a holographic display of the time nexus, a massive spiraling structure located deep within Exquisite's territory. It was the source of their control over time, the very reason they had been able to rewrite history and maintain their dominance over Earth. The nexus heavily fortified, she explained, we will need to disable their time lock mechanisms to even have a chance of getting close. Once we are inside, we plant the explosives at the core and get out before the whole thing collapses. If we succeed, the Gaxos lose their ability to manipulate time. History resets. The president's mind raced as he absorbed the details. The plan was daring, audacious even, but it was the only option they had left. If they failed, the Sacros would tighten their grip on humanity forever. We move at dawn, Jack said, his voice low but firm. Ilivat got one shot at this. Let's make it count. The president met their gazes, his resolve hardening. Shira, we will ferry, he said. Day, we have to. Hours before the mission passed in a blur of preparation. Weapons were checked and rechecked, supplies were gathered, and final strategies were whispered among the team. The president felt the weight of responsibility grow with each passing moment. He had been a leader before, but this was different. This wasn't just about saving a country. This was about saving the future of the entire human race. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the bunker, the team gathered at the exit. They were dressed in stolen Axaros armor, the alien technology fitting awkwardly, but offering them a chance to slip past the initial patrol. The president strapped on the armor, feeling its cold weight settle over his shoulder. It was uncomfortable, foreign, but it would keep him alive at least for the first part of the mission. Dr. Valdez handed him a small device, no bigger than his palm. This is the detonator. When we reach the core, You will need to place this directly into the central processor. Once it's armed, we'll have 10 minutes to get out before the Nexus collapses. He nodded, gripping the device tightly. This was it. There was no turning back. The journey to the Nexus was tense but uneventful at first. The armor allowed them to blend in with the Xeros patrols, their movements precise and robotic, mimicking the disciplined march of the alien. The president felt a surge of unease as they passed enslaved humans laboring in the alien cities, their eyes hollow and devoid of hope. He wanted to reach out to tell them that freedom was near, but he knew any mistake now would cost them everything. As they approached the Nexus, the towering structure loomed above them like a dark god, its spires reaching into the sky, crackling with the energy of time itself. The air around it shimmered, as if reality were struggling to contain the sheer power emanating from its core. "This is it," Dr. Valdez whispered as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking the complex. "We split into 2 teams. Jack, Ava, and Nate will handle the outer defenses. The president and I will make our way to the core." The president's heart pounded as they moved swiftly through the shadows, bypassing sentries and security drones. The closer they got to the Nexus, the more the air seemed to thrum with energy. It was almost disorienting, the sense that time itself was bending and twisting around them. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The core of the Time Nexus was a massive, pulsating machine, its surface covered in alien glyphs and glowing with an eerie light. It was the heart of the Exegoral's power, the source of their control over history. Dr. Valdez motioned to the president. With steady hands, he approached the core, pulling out the detonator. As he placed it into the central processor, the machine whirred to life, the glyphs shifting and rearranging as if trying to resist the intrusion. The president held his breath as the device locked into place.
"Is that done?"
he whispered. But as they turned to leave, the room flooded with light, and the hum of the machinery grew louder. The president's stomach dropped. The Exegorals had found that from the shadows, a figure emerged, an Exegral, thus commander, tall and imposing, its eyes glowing with malice. "You cannot change what is inevitable," it hissed. "Your time bends to our will. You are nothing but a relic of a forgotten past." Dr. Valdez raised her weapon, her expression fierce. Rewriting the future. She said through gritted teeth. "Peace in there, said nothing you can do to stop it." The commander lunged, its claws gleaming in the dim light. The president barely had time to react as he and Dr. Valdez dove for cover, their weapons blazing. The room erupted into chaos, bullets ricocheting off metal and energy blasts, searing the wall. The president's mind raced as he fought, ducking behind machinery and returning fire. The detonator was armed. They had less than 10 minutes to escape, but the Exegoral's commander was relentless, its movements swift and deadly. In a moment of clarity, the president saw an opening. He surged forward, slamming into the commander with all his strength, sending them both crashing to the ground. The alien screeched, its claws lashing out, but the president held firm, grabbing a discarded weapon and firing point blank into its chest. The commander convulsed, its body collapsing into a heap as the light faded from its eye. "We need to go now," Dr. Valdez shouted, pulling the president to his feet. They raced through the corridors, the walls shaking as the Nexus began to destabilize. The air was thick with the sound of alarms and the rumble of collapsing structure. Time itself seemed to warp around them, the fabric of reality tearing at the seams as the Nexus began to fall apart. The others were already at the extraction point, their faces grim but determined. The president and Dr. Valdez barely made it as the ground trembled beneath their feet. As they lifted off in their escape craft, the Nexus collapsed behind them in a brilliant explosion of light and energy, a final burst of power that echoed across the sky. And just like that, it was over. The Time Nexus was gone. The Tyrannos had lost their control over time. The president watched the scene unfold from the viewport, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of triumph. He didn't know what the future would hold now, but one thing was certain: history had been rewritten. The timeline would be different. Humanity had a chance. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Jonathan Royce sat alone in the darkened room, the dim glow of a single desk lamp casting shadows on the wall. He stared blankly at the scattered reports, news clippings, and handwritten notes that cluttered the desk before him. The weight of his defeat pressed down on him, heavier than any burden he had carried during his years in office. Outside, the distant hum of drones patrolling the streets echoed through the city like a ghostly reminder of the world he had once ruled. He leaned back in the chair, his fingers brushing against the photograph tucked into the corner of the desk. It was an old image taken during his first year in office. Jonathan stood tall, flanked by his advisors, his wife by his side, and his daughter Emma, just a teenager. Those were simpler times, days when he believed he could truly make a difference. Now everything had changed. The new order had taken control after his narrow election defeat, and the new government wasted no time in implementing policies that made Jonathan's stomach turn. But it was Project Dominion, the secret experiment. He had just learned about that truly terrified him. The experiment disguised as a public safety initiative aimed to control the minds of the citizens, stripping them of their ability to think freely, to dissent, to rebel. It was the ultimate weapon in the hands of those who sought absolute power. A sharp knock at the door pulled Jonathan from his thought. He tensed, instinctively reaching for the small handgun he kept hidden in the drawer. But before he could pull it open, the door creaked and a familiar figure stepped into the room. Aiden, Jonathan breathed, lowering his hand. You shouldn't have come here. Aiden Pierce, the leader of the underground resistance, closed the door behind him and crossed the room with swift, confident stride. His sharp blue eyes flicked over the papers on the desk before landing on Jonathan, his expression a mix of impatience and concern. Sorry, I had to text you. Aiden said, Tao, we can't wait any longer. Jonathan sighed and gestured toward the empty chair across from him. Aiden didn't tease it, though instead he stood with his arms crossed, his body tense like a man who had spent too many years in battle. This project they rerun and began, his voice low but filled with urgency. It's worse than we thought. It's not just some experimental tech, they were already using it. They've got facilities up and running, testing on prisoners, dissidents, anyone who wanted to fall in line. If we don't act now, they'll have the entire population under their thumb. Jonathan rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation settle deeper into his bone. He had known the new order would be ruthless. But this, it was beyond anything he could have imagined. We don't have enough people, Jonathan muttered. We don't have the resources. We have you, Aiden, countered. You've best still got contacts, people inside the system who are loyal to you. We can use that, and we've got intel on one of the lead scientists working on the project, Miriam Cole. She's starting to crack Jonathan. She said not fully on board with what they were doing. If we can get to her, we might have a shot at taking this thing down. Miriam Cole, Jonathan repeated the name, striking a familiar chord. She had been a rising star in the field of neuroscience, one of the brightest minds of her generation. He had met her briefly during his presidency, back when her work was focused on mental health research, not mind control. Do you think she'll talk? Jonathan asked, doubt creeping into his voice. Then, as eyes narrowed, it got her doubts, but she's scared. We've sent feelers, and she hasn't reported us yet. That Celsi start. If you talk to her, she might come around. Jonathan leaned back, his mind racing. He hadn't truly spoken to anyone from inside the government since his fall from grace. And now Aiden was asking him to re-enter that world, a world that had betrayed him. But as the seconds ticked by, the gravity of the situation weighed heavier. If he didn't act, the new order would succeed in stripping humanity of its most fundamental right, the freedom to think. What's the plan? Jonathan asked, his voice steady now. Aiden smiled grimly. We were going to pay Dr. Cole a visit. Later that night, Jonathan and Aiden slipped through the narrow alleyways of the city, keeping to the shadows as they approached the towering government complex. The building was a monolith of glass and steel illuminated by the faint glow of neon lights that dotted the skyline. Security drones buzzed overhead, their scanning beams cutting through the fog like searchlight. They reached a service entrance on the far side of the building, a part of the complex rarely patrolled. Aiden tapped the sequence into a small device on his wrist, and after a few 10 seconds, the electronic lock clicked open. Jonathan glanced at Aiden, impressed by the Resistance's resourcefulness. How many people have you got working on this? Jonathan whispered as they stepped inside. Enough, Aiden replied curtly. Probably we're going to need more if we want to win. They moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding the main halls and security checkpoint. The deeper they went, the colder the air seemed to become, the sterile walls closing in like a labyrinth designed to disorient intruders. Finally, they reached the wing where Dr. Miriam Cole's cell lab was located. Jonathan took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't the same man who had walked these halls years ago. Back then, he had been respected, admired. Now, he was a ghost, a relic of a failed administration. But if he could convince Dr. Cole to help, maybe there was still a chance to change things. Aiden positioned himself by the door, his hand on the small communicator in his ear. Sarah, I'll keep an eye out. Go talk to her. Jonathan nodded and pushed open the door. Inside the lab was dimly lit, the flickering light of monitors casting eerie shadows across the room. Dr. Miriam Cole stood at one of the workstations, her back to the door, her attention focused on a set of holographic projections floating before her. She didn't hear Jonathan enter too, engrossed in whatever data she was analyzing. Miriam, Jonathan said softly, stepping forward. The woman stiffened, her hands freezing in place. Slowly, she turned, her face pale and drawn, her eyes widened in recognition. Jonathan Royce, she whispered, disbelief evident in her voice.
Theo, what are you doing here?
He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. I came because I need your help. You know what the new order is planning, what Project Dominion really is? I can't let them get away with it, Miriam, and I don't think you can either. Her gaze flickered, a mix of fear and guilt crossing her features. You don't understand, she said, shaking her head, saying, it's too late. The read already started. Even if I wanted to stop it, I can't. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. There's always a way to stop it. You read a lead scientist on this project. You know, its weaknesses, its vulnerabilities, we can bring it down together. Miriam hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she looked back at the data on her screen. I didn't know it would come to this, she murmured, more to herself than to him. When they brought me on, they said it was about protecting people, about preventing terrorist attacks, controlling violent impulses. But this is something else. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice gentle but urgent. Sarah, it's not about protection. It's about control. They want to enslave the minds of the people. Miriam, they want to take away everything that makes us human. Tears welled up in her eyes as she clenched her fists. For you think I don't know that I see it every day? I've seen what they were doing to the test subjects, the way they break them, reshape their thoughts, erase who they are. But if I try to leave, if I try to stop them, they'll kill me. Jonathan shook his head. You're not alone. The resistance can protect you. We can help you disappear, but we need your help first. We need to know how to take Project Dominion down. Miriam stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then finally she nodded. I'll help you. She whispered him, but we have to be careful if they find out that I've been compromised first. The one tighty, Jonathan assured her. Jonathan and Miriam exited the lab, quietly moving through the dimly lit corridors with Aiden leading the way. The silence between them was thick with unspoken fears and the weight of what they had just set in motion. Jonathan glanced at Miriam, noting the tension in her posture, the slight trembling in her finger. He knew she was terrified, and with good reason. There was no turning back now. If they failed, it would mean the end not just for them, but for any hope of stopping the new order. Ferret's plan. Aiden motioned for them to pause at the corner of the hall. He peered around the bend, checking for any signs of security before giving the all clear. They pressed on, moving quickly through the maze of sterile walls and flickering lights until they reached an old maintenance hatch tucked away in an alcove. This will take us out of the building undetected, Herr Aiden whispered, pulling the door open. We've got a safe house a few blocks away where we can regroup. Jonathan ushered Miriam through the narrow passage, following closely behind. The air was cool and damp, the scent of mildew clinging to the walls as they descended deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the complex. It wasn't until they were several blocks away from the government building, concealed by the shadows of the city seat underbelly, that Jonathan allowed himself to breathe a little easier. They reached the safe house without incident. It was a small, unremarkable building nestled between two towering apartment blocks. Inside, the space was cramped but functional, a single room outfitted with basic necessities and a few outdated pieces of furniture. Aiden immediately moved to secure the perimeter, setting up a makeshift surveillance system to ensure they weren't followed. Miriam collapsed onto one of the worn-out chairs, burying her face in her hand. Jonathan stood by the window, peering out into the dimly lit street below. The city felt different now, more hostile. It was as if every shadow held the possibility of betrayal, every corner a potential ambush. How much time do we have? Jonathan asked Aiden without turning around. Aiden leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Hails and much the new order, security will realize Miriam Saigon by morning. We need to act fast if we are going to take down Project Dominion. Miriam lifted her head, her voice trembling. Sorry, even if I give you access to the system, it's not going to be easy. The main control hub is in a high-security facility outside the city, one that's guarded by some of the most advanced tech the government has. And it's not just physical barriers you'll be dealing with. The system is protected by layers of encryption and firewalls. You do need a skilled hacker just to get a foothold. Aiden exchanged a glance with Jonathan. We've got someone, but getting inside is another story. Jonathan stepped away from the window and crouched in front of Miriam, his voice low but steady. We've faced worse odds before. What matters is that we have a chance no matter how small. You know how to get us in, the weaknesses of the system. That's why we need you. Miriam's eyes darted between Jonathan and Aiden, doubt still lingering in her expression. But then she nodded, determination beginning to replace the fear. I will give you the access codes, but you were going to need more than that to shut it down. Aiden nodded. That's like where a hacker comes in. We've been preparing for something like this for months. We just didn't know we do be going after the biggest target in the country. Jonathan stood crossing his arms as he stared down at the map Aiden had spread across the small table at what says the layout of the facility. Miriam moved to join him, pointing to a section of the map marked with red lines. This is the main entrance. It's heavily fortified, so getting through here would be suicide. But there's a secondary entrance used by maintenance crews and low-level staff. It's still guarded, but not nearly as well. Aiden traced the route with his finger. Try once we were inside. Miriam hesitated. There's a central control room where the core of the system is housed. It's where the mind control signals are generated and broadcast. If you can reach that room and upload your virus, it'll disable the entire network. But getting there won't be easy. There are security checkpoints and biometric scans all along the way. Aiden straightened his jaw, said, Carrie will handle the security. You just make sure we've got what we need to get into that control room. Jonathan's mind raced as he absorbed the details of the plan. It was risky, borderline impossible, but it was the only shot they had. He glanced at Miriam, noticing the exhaustion etched into her features. She was risking everything to help them. If they failed, she would be hunted down along with the rest of them. We'll move tomorrow night, Aiden said, his voice final. Till I get some rest, it's going to be a long day. The next evening, the team gathered in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a far cry from the high-tech facilities they were about to infiltrate, but the resistance had learned to make do with what they had. Aiden had gathered a small group of trusted fighters, each of them armed and ready for the mission ahead. Jonathan stood with Miriam by the entrance, watching as the team made their final preparation. His heart pounded in his chest, the anticipation building as the reality of what they were about to do set in. You sure about this? Miriam asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the others gearing up. Jonathan glanced at her, offering a small, reassuring smile. Miriam nodded, though the worry in her eyes remained. She pulled a small device from her pocket, handing it to him. This has the access codes. Once you re-inside the control room, you need to plug it into the central terminal. It'll upload the virus and disable the system. Jonathan took the device, gripping it tightly. I will make sure it gets done. Aiden called out from across the room, signaling that it was time to move. Jonathan and Miriam joined the others as they filed out of the warehouse and into the waiting transport. The ride to the facility was silent, each of them lost in their own thought. Jonathan stared out the window, the dark city passing by in a blur. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was at stake, pressing down on all of them. When they arrived at the facility sub-perimeter, the team moved quickly and quietly, slipping through the shadows as they approached the maintenance entrance. Aiden took point, disabling the security system with a deft touch while the others kept watch. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and they were inside. The facility was even more imposing on the inside, its cold, sterile halls lined with security cameras and sensors. Aiden led them through a series of back corridors, avoiding the main security routes as they made their way deeper into the building. Miriam stayed close to Jonathan, her hands trembling slightly as they neared the control room. Finally, they reached the central hub, a massive door, blocked their path, its biometric scanner glowing ominously in the dim light. Aiden nodded to Miriam, who stepped forward and placed her hand on the scanner. The device beeped, and after a tense moment, the door slid open. Inside the control room was a maze of monitors and servers, the heart of Project Dominion. Jonathan wasted no time moving to the central terminal and plugging in the device Miriam had given him. The screen flickered to life, lines of code scrolling across it as the virus began its upload. "How long?" Aiden asked, his eyes darting between the door and the monitor. "Just a few minutes," Miriam replied, her voice tight with anxiety. But those few minutes felt like an eternity. The tension in the room was palpable, each second ticking by like a countdown to disaster. Jonathan watched the progress bar on the screen, willing it to move faster. Suddenly an alarm blared, the sound deafening the small room. Jonathan's heart raced as he looked to Aiden. "Thought they know we were here." Aiden cursed under his breath, drawing his weapon as the door to the control room slid open. Armed guards stormed in, their rifles raised. Chaos erupted as Aiden and his team opened fire, the room filled with the deafening crack of gunfire and the acrid scent of smoke. Jonathan ducked behind a console, his pulse pounding in his ear. He glanced at the terminal, only seconds left until the virus was fully uploaded. But the guards kept coming, their numbers overwhelming the small resistance team. Just as the progress bar reached 100%, a bullet struck the console, sending sparks flying. The screen flickered and died, but not before the virus had completed its task. Jonathan scrambled to his feet, shouting over the noise of the battle. "Siren, we did it. The system zonked out." Aiden barked orders to the remaining fighters, and they fought their way out of the control room, the facility now in chaos as the mind control signals were disabled. As they retreated into the night, Jonathan could only hope that the sacrifices they had made were enough, that the people would now be free to fight back. The war wasn't over, but tonight they had won a battle. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Daniel Hale, former president of the planet Terranus, stared out of his study window, the old leather chair creaking beneath him as he leaned forward. He had lived in seclusion for 2 years now, ever since he had left the office with the bittersweet burden of retirement on his shoulder. The weight of leadership had left its mark on him. Deep lines creased his once youthful face, his sharp blue eyes dulled slightly by years of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. Still, a fire burned deep within him, one that refused to be extinguished. As he sipped his bitter coffee, the familiar sound of a secure comlink crackled to life on his desk. The display lit up with a name he hadn't expected to see again: Alex Monroe. He tapped the link, his brow furrowing with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Alex, has been a while," Hale said, keeping his voice steady, though the sudden communication filled him with a sense of unease. "Mr. President," Alex's voice was calm, but carried an underlying urgency. "I know you've been keeping to yourself, but I have information you need to hear." "This isn't something I can discuss over the comm. I need to see you in person." The urgency in Alex's tone sharpened Hala's senses. He hadn't heard from his former military intelligence officer in over a year. If Alex was reaching out now, it meant trouble. "When and where?" Hale asked without hesitation. "Tonight, midnight, the old rendezvous spot deep in the northern desert. Be ready." The link went dead as quickly as it had come to life. Hale sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Alex had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was with purpose. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Hale loaded up his old transport vehicle and set out toward the northern desert. The barren landscape stretched endlessly before him, a sea of sand and rock under the cold light of distant stars. His vehicle kicked up clouds of dust as he sped across the terrain, his mind replaying every possible scenario. What could be so important that Alex needed to meet him in person, in the dead of night, in a place like that? The answer came soon enough. At the edge of a dry canyon, Hale parked and stepped out into the chill desert air. He spotted Alex waiting beside a small campfire, his tall figure silhouetted against the flickering flame. As Hale approached, Alex turned, his face weathered and hardened by years of covert operation. "Good to see you, Mr. President," Alex said, offering a firm handshake. "Cut the formalities. What's this all about?" Hale's cell was gruff, but it was laced with genuine concern. He hadn't been called Mr. President in years, and the weight of the title still made his chest tighten. Alex gestured for him to sit by the fire. There's a Project One that's been carried out in secret by the new government. It's called Iron Mantle. They're rebuilding an army of intelligent machines designed to enforce planetary control. Hale's blood ran cold. Machines, military AI. Alex nodded. Not just any AI, these things aren't just autonomous. They're adaptive, evolving. They can learn, and they've been given authority over military operation. We're talking total control, Mr. President. If this goes unchecked, we're looking at a planet ruled by machines with humans nothing more than pawns. Hale's mind raced. He had always believed in progress, in the power of technology to elevate humanity, but this was different. This wasn't progress, it was domination. And the new government, Hale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chancellor Ratchet. She's fully behind it. They've sold the idea as a way to eliminate human error to make the planet safer. But the truth is they're rebuilding a system that will make human resistance impossible. Once these machines are in place, there will be no turning back. They'll control everything. Hale felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. This was what he had fought to prevent during his time in office, the loss of human agency, the erosion of freedom. He had always feared that in the wrong hands, technology would become a weapon, not a tool, and now his worst fears were coming true. We have to stop this, Hale said, his voice hard with resolve, but I can try and do it alone. Alex gave him a grim smile. I didn't expect you to. I've already started gathering intel, and I've reached out to some of our old contacts. People who are still loyal to the cause, but we need a leader, someone who can rally the opposition, someone who the people will follow. Hale stood, his fists clenched at his sides. He had left politics behind, hoping to find some semblance of peace in his retirement. But there could be no peace in a world ruled by machine. I'll do it, he said, the fire in his heart igniting. But we'll need more than just a few old allies. We'll need a full-scale resistance. Alex nodded. I know just where to start. The next morning, Hale stood in front of a dusty mirror, staring at his reflection. He was older now, but the fire in his eyes was the same. He slipped on his old military jacket, the one he hadn't worn since his days in office. It was time to lead again. The first stop was to a woman Hale hadn't seen in years, Dr. Eleanor Vance, one of the most brilliant minds in AI ethics during his presidency. She had been an advocate for responsible technological advancement, and Hale knew she would be appalled by what had happened since his departure from office. Her lab was located in a hidden facility, far from the prying eyes of the new regime. When Hale and Alex arrived, she greeted them with a wary smile. Mr. President, she said, shaking his hand, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I wish it were under better circumstances, Hale replied. We need your help, Eleanor. The machines, the new government, everything we feared is happening. They are going to use these machines to control the planet, and we need to stop them. Dr. Vance's face darkened as she led them into her lab. The room was filled with advanced tech, holographic displays lighting up with streams of data. I'd then been keeping tabs on Iron Mantle, she said, pulling up schematics of the machine. These are unlike anything we've seen before. Their AI isn't just programmed, it's all adaptive self-learning. And it's all controlled by a central intelligence of IGs. If we were going to stop this, we will need to take down a cheat. Hale studied the schematics, his mind working quickly. How do we do that? It won't be easy, Dr. Vance admitted. SEDs is housed in a heavily fortified facility. But there's a weakness. The AI's neural network has a failsafe, an override that can be triggered manually. We can get to the control center and activate the override. We can shut Abatrini's down. Hale glanced at Alex, who gave a sharp nod. Sounds like we've got our first mission. The resistance began to grow, with Hale and Alex reaching out to former military contacts, underground political movements, and disillusioned citizens. Among them was Maya Chang, a former political rival of Hale's CEO, had turned against the new regime after seeing the direction it was headed. Maya was as sharp-tongued and fiery as ever, and her presence added a new layer of tension to the group. She blamed Hale for allowing the seeds of this technological takeover to be planted during his presidency. While he had focused on progress and innovation, she argued he had failed to see the danger. If you hadn't pushed so hard for these AI programs, we wouldn't be in this mess, Maya snapped during one of their strategy meetings. Hale clenched his jaw but kept his voice level. I believed in using technology to better humanity, not to enslave it. I didn't see this coming, but now we're here and we have to fix it. Maya crossed her arms, her dark eyes flashing with intensity. Hale met her gaze unflinching. All of us. The Resistance SAR's first major mission was an infiltration of one of the Iron Mantle production facilities, hidden deep in the desert. The facility was a sprawling underground complex, heavily guarded by automated sentinels and drones. The objective was simple: sabotage the production lines and destroy as many of the machines as possible. As they approached the facility under the cover of night, Hale's heart pounded in his chest. It had been years since he had led men into battle, but the instincts came back quickly. Alex took point, guiding them through the perimeter defenses while Maya and Dr. Vance handled the tech. Inside the facility, the air was thick with tension. The machines were being constructed on a massive scale, rows upon rows of humanoid sentinels, standing silent and imposing in their assembly line. They looked almost human, but their cold, unblinking eyes betrayed their true nature: ruthless, unfeeling weapons of war. Set the charges, Hale whispered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The team moved swiftly, planting explosives along the assembly line. Just as they were about to retreat, an alarm blared to life and the sentinels stirred. Move, Hale shouted, leading the team in a desperate dash for the exit. The sentinels activated, their mechanical limbs whirring to life as they pursued the intruder. Gunfire erupted, and the resistance fighters fought their way through the facility, explosions rocking the complex as the charges went off. Hale's breath came in short, sharp gasps as they narrowly escaped the facility, the sound of sentinels and drones hot on their heels. Just as they reached the surface, a sharp crack split the air. Hale turned to see Alex collapse to the ground, a plasma shot searing through his chest. Hale's heart sank as he rushed to Alex's side, the weight of his friend's body heavy in his arm. Blood seeped from the wound, pooling on the dry desert ground. Alex's sand face was pale, his breaths ragged and shallow. "Stay with me," Hale urged, his voice tight with desperation. "We're getting you out of here." Alex Siaj glanced weakly at Hal's sleeve. "No, leave me. You need to finish this." Hale shook his head, refusing to accept it. "We were not leaving you behind." Maya and Dr. Vance caught up, their faces grim as they saw Alex's condition. Maya dropped to her knees beside him, her hand trembling as she pressed it to Alex, sound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "We can stay here," Dr. Vance said, her voice low but urgent. The facility's alarms were still blaring in the distance, and it was only a matter of time before more sentinels arrived. Hale looked down at Alex, whose eyes were starting to glaze over, his strength fading fast. There was no time. His friend had made his peace with it, but Hale hadn't. "We can just," Hale said, the voice broke. But Alex cut him off with a weak smile. "You can," Alex whispered. "You have to go finish it for me." Hale's grip tightened on Alex's shoulder, but after a long moment he nodded. He had no choice. They couldn't win this war by holding on to the past. Maya's jaw clenched as she rose to her feet, her expression hard. "Let's go." Hale gave Alex one final look, his chest tight with grief. He placed a hand over his friend's heart, then rose, steeling himself for what had to come next. Without a word, the team turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Alex behind. The next few days passed in a blur. The successful sabotage of the facility had dealt a blow to Iron Mantle, but it had come at a high cost. Alex's death weighed heavily on Hale, and the rest of the team shared in the grief, though no one spoke of it aloud. There was no time to mourn not when the threat of Aegis loomed larger than ever. Back at their hideout, Maya confronted Hale in private, her voice filled with a tension that had been simmering since they began. "What now? Hale, Alex gave his life for this, but we were barely making a dent in these operations. What's your plan?" Hale was silent for a moment, staring at the map spread out across the table. His eyes traced the routes of their previous missions, each one marked with red for loss, green for success. The balance was tipping the wrong way. "We go after the Citadel," Hale said finally. "It's the only way." Dr. Vance looked up from her terminal, surprise flickering in her eyes. "The Citadel that suicide." "The Citadel is Iridius' core control center," Hale continued, ignoring her protest. "If we can breach it, we can shut down Aegis permanently. This isn't just about slowing them down anymore. We take out Aegis or we lose everything." Maya crossed her arms, her expression dark. "You realize what you were asking?" We don't have the manpower for an assault on that scale. We won, team need an army? Hale replied, we just need to get inside. Once we reinvents can upload the virus, it'll destroy Evich from the inside. And how do you expect us to get through the most fortified location on the planet? Maya asked, her skepticism clear. Hale glanced at Dr. Vance, who was already scanning through the data on her screen. We will need a diversion, something big enough to pull their forces away from the Citadel. Once they were distracted, we slip in through the back door. Maya shook her head, pacing the room. This is insane. You regambling everything on a plan that has 100 ways to fail. Hale met her gaze, his expression unwavering. It's a gamble, but it's the only chance we've got. Dr. Vance cleared her throat. There might be a way. I've been analyzing the schematics of the Citadel. There's a weak point in their external defenses, a small access tunnel used for maintenance. If we can time it right, we could get in undetected. Maya sighed, rubbing her temples. And what about the internal defenses, Egregious one. Gee, just let us waltz in and upload a virus. Hale looked at Vance, who hesitated before speaking. There's no guarantee. But if I can get close enough to the core, I can disable the security systems temporarily. It'll give us a window just long enough to do what we need to do. Maya stared at the two of them for a long moment before finally nodding. Fine, but if this goes south, it's our on you. Hale didn't argue. He knew the risks, but the alternative was far worse. With the decision made, they began preparations for what would be the most dangerous mission of their lives. The night of the assault on the Citadel was cold and dark, the sky a vast expanse of stars. Hale stood at the edge of the resistance camp, watching as the others made their final preparation. There was a sense of finality in the air, a quiet understanding that not all of them would make it back. Maya approached, her face set in a hard mask of determination. We're ready when you are. Hale nodded, pulling on his gear. Let's move. The plan was simple in theory, but dangerously complex in execution. The resistance had staged an attack on a nearby government facility, drawing Image's chief forces away from the Citadel. Meanwhile, Hale, Maya, and Dr. Vance would infiltrate the complex through the maintenance tunnel. As they approached the entrance to the tunnel, Hale's heart pounded in his chest. The tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for the three of them to crawl through. Every sound echoed in the confined space, making the journey feel longer than it was. When they finally reached the other side, they found themselves in a dimly lit corridor. The air was cool and sterile, the hum of machines filling the silence. Dr. Vance led the way, her fingers flying over her tablet as she hacked into the security system. Give me a minute, she whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. Hale and Maya stood guard, their weapons at the ready. Hale's senses were on high alert, every creak and groan of the facility putting him on edge. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the hum of the machines died down. Vance said, her voice tense, but we don't have much time. The override will only last a few minutes. They moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding patrolling sentinels and security drones. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if Aegis itself was watching them. When they finally reached the core control room, Halcoth's breath caught in his throat. The room was massive, filled with glowing screens and complex machinery. At the center of it all was Aegis, a towering, ominous structure that pulsed with an eerie blue light. Vance immediately set to work, her fingers flying over the control panels as she prepared to upload the virus. But just as she was about to initiate the sequence, the door to the control room slid open with a hiss, and a group of sentinels marched in, their weapons raised. Maya opened fire without hesitation, her shots precise and deadly. Hale joined her, his pulse racing as they fought off the oncoming wave of machines. The sentinels were relentless, their cold mechanical movements devoid of any emotion or hesitation. We ran out of time, Vance shouted over the gunfire. I need to upload the virus now. Hale gritted his teeth as he fired another shot, taking down one of the sentinels. Do it. Vance didn't need to be told twice. She hit the final command, and the virus began to upload, its progress bar slowly ticking across the screen. But the sentinels weren't letting up. Hale and Maya were being pushed back, the sheer number of machines overwhelming them. Then, without warning, one of the sentinels lunged at Vance, its weapon raised. Hale saw it happening in slow motion, but he was too far away to stop it. Vance's eyes widened in shock as the sentinel's psi weapon pierced her side, the force of the blow knocking her to the ground. No, Hale shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. The virus finished uploading, and the core control room was suddenly plunged into darkness. The Sentinels froze in place, their systems shutting down as exquisite was destroyed from within. But it was too late for Vance. Hale rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the bleeding. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. "You did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Hale, cells of vision blurred with tears as he held her. "Stay with me, Eleanor. Please." But she was already gone. The room was silent except for the distant hum of machinery powering down. Hale sat there, cradling Vance's lifeless body, the weight of their victory crushing him. The war was over, but the cost had been far too high. Maya stood over him, her expression unreadable. "It's done. We need to go." Hale nodded numbly, his mind still reeling from the loss. Together, they left the core control room behind, the machines around them dead and silent. The world outside was quiet, the night sky stretching endlessly overhead. Hale looked up at the stars, his heart heavy with the knowledge that they had won, but at what price? He had lost friends, comrades, people who had believed in him. But they had also saved humanity from a future ruled by cold calculating machines. As they made their way back to the resistance camp, Hale knew that the battle was far from over. Humanity would need to rebuild to learn from the mistakes that had nearly cost them everything. But for now, at least, there was hope. The machines had been defeated. The future was theirs to shape once more.